The Steelbook era of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise includes memorable games and projects like FNAF Security Breach and the Help Wanted games. These games are known for their complex lore or story that include many mysteries for the horror community to solve, and the latest Steelbook project, FNAF Secret of the Mimic, is no exception, as it's going to be closely related to the newer games, to older games, and even to the tales from the Pizzaplex novels. And throughout this channel, I've attempted to solve different mysteries from the Steelbook FNAF games about different characters, Easter eggs, and even endings. So in this video, I'm going to combine my best videos on the Steelbook Studios FNAF games, making one long video. So sit back and enjoy 2 hours of Steelbook Five Nights at Freddy's theories, starting with solving 3 of the biggest mysteries from these games, and starting with scrapped emails from FNAF AR. Five Nights at Freddy's Special Delivery was a mobile AR game released on November 25th, 2019, and would have been the 9th game in the franchise. Players would confront malfunctioning animatronics in the real world and attempt to survive those horrors come to life. Through the gameplay, players subscribe to Fazbear's Entertainment brand new Fazbear's Funtime service and get their favorite animatronics on demand. Due to unfortunate circumstances, the visiting animatronics malfunction and attack subscribers instead of entertaining them. The game was out for almost 5 years until the servers were officially shut down on March 24th, 2024. But I still believe that cut content and scrapped emails can be used to solve the lore. But when looking at the game itself, because of the cancellation and because of the poor reception of the game, fans have constantly been arguing the canonicity of FNAF AR. Some have argued that it is canon to the game's timeline, while others argue only parts of it are, or that the game isn't canon at all. But because of the connection and setup to FNAF Security Breach, I believe Special Delivery is canon, and that's how I will see it throughout the entirety of the video. Specifically, the emails tell us everything we need to know about different characters, the Pizzaplex, and even a virus that had a major role in Security Breach. These emails were the key to solving parts of the lore in the newer games of the franchise, and even the older lore of the games like in FNAF 2. And I also believe this would apply to the cut or scrapped emails that never made it to the final game. Now, using scrapped evidence for theorizing can be debated on its own, and I will get back to this topic later in the video. But for now, I want to focus on scrapped emails that can be the key to solving Michael Lafton, Vanessa, and even the animatronics. When looking at Michael Lafton and his role after Pizzeria Simulator, where his supposed death took place, it's been widely debated if he's actually alive and if he had a role with the creation of the Pizzaplex. And one of these scrapped email addresses actually directly confirmed that he was alive and was in contact with Fazbear's Entertainment. When looking at the email, it reads, ID alert to M. Afton at bigbearmails.net. Now obviously the email M. Afton stands for Michael Afton, and it's hard to argue that it could belong to any other character from the series. Although I have seen some fans argue that it stands for Miss Afton, but I don't think this would be the case, as usually the first and last name are used, and we don't even have confirmation that Miss Afton exists. So although we don't actually have any exact emails that were sent between Michael and others from the company, there's still an important detail with the address that might connect Mike to Vanessa. Next to the address, we learn that the receiver had been sent an ID alert. These alerts are sent to notify users of security events or any updates, and really this alert could have been for anything. But most commonly, it's because suspicious activity was detected on the email, like someone else trying to sign in. So what if someone was trying to sign in to Michael Lafton's email? And this wouldn't be the first time this happened in FNAF AR. We can find a thread of emails from the tech team on Fazbear's Entertainment and from a user under the name V_A, discussing a virus from a circuit board that poses a major threat. VA claims to be the senior technical support representative and claims that they will be able to take care of the virus and will be able to delete it off of all systems. And eventually they are successful, or that's what VA makes it look like. In reality, the virus has spread through all systems, and VA is able to take control of animatronics and even of other people's accounts. They are able to sign out everyone out of their account one by one and take sole control of every system, and we know VA was actually Vanessa. Vanessa hacked all of those emails, so what if she was also attempting to gain access to Michael's email, which caused the ID alert to be sent? If Michael does work for Fazbear's Entertainment like it's been heavily theorized, then it makes sense he would have an email with higher and easier access to resources than Vanessa's. So Michael received an ID alert because of Vanessa, and it could be interesting to think of other interactions between the two characters that we simply don't know about. I've made a couple videos attempting to prove that he's still alive in the new era of the franchise that covered the one-for-one recreation of his room found in the Pizzaplex, of toys that were in the FNAF warehouse that presumably belonged to him, and how he might have been mentioned in FNAF Ruin. But something I didn't mention was a simple sticky note which may also confirm he is alive, meeting with Smith 5 p.m. Smith could be anyone, so to connect him to Michael, let's go all the way back to Five Nights at Freddy's 2. On nights 1 through 6, we play as a security guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald, but then suddenly on night 7, we play as someone named Fritz Smith. Fritz Smith is believed to be an alias for Michael Afton when he secretly worked there, a name similar to Mike Schmidt, which is also an alias when he worked in the pizzeria in the first FNAF game. So if Fritz Smith really is Michael Afton, then this meeting could be referring to Michael. Again, this would make sense, as if he did work in the Pizzaplex and had a major role in it, then of course he would be in meetings, of course he would need to meet with different people, of course he would still be alive, which is why I believe this scrapped email address and this sticky note single-handedly prove that Michael Afton is still alive in this new era of the FNAF franchise. And if you disagree, that is completely fine, as nothing is confirmed, but there's even more evidence that I will be covering in a future video. But moving on, and when looking at the animatronics, let's look at Jimmy. Jimmy was an employee of DLZ Shipping Solutions and was helping a customer with a delivery when no one ordered it. He was then fired as he presumably knew too much, and there's even this sticky note in Security Breach, remember Jimmy. Although these emails which were about the situation were scrapped, Jimmy was still mentioned in Security Breach, which could mean they're still canon or important. But when looking more in depth at the emails themselves, they revealed to us that a customer never received a package, and it's not clear what happened to it. But then suddenly, shortly after, they received a new package of animatronics that Jimmy is not aware of nor that he authorized. The animatronics then begin to act weird and even violent. Bonnie was even revealed to eat a neighbor's cat, and the employees of the warehouse where they were being stored refused to come into work. And after Jimmy was fired, this was the last we heard of these animatronics. I think it's clear the reason they were acting strange was because of the glitch trap virus, the virus that was mentioned a lot in the other emails, and the virus we also learned about in Help Wanted. Because we know Vanessa was in control of the systems, we can assume it was her who made the first shipment go missing, and it was her who sent the replacement with the glitched animatronics. This could have been to test them, to see how they reacted in the warehouse, to see what changed. These scrapped emos would have told us everything we needed to know about the Glamrock animatronics. The reason they're acting strange, violent, the reason they're hunting down Gregory is because they're under the glitch trap virus's control or under Vanessa's control. And the same would apply to any other animatronic in the Pizzaplex, besides Glamrock Freddy, as we know the effect didn't work on him. Not only that, but the emos would have also directly set up the Mimic since the very beginning. Based on other emos, we know old circuit boards were scanned by the company, which is what caused the virus. And in the books, we know those circuit boards belong to the Mimic, containing the Mimic 1 chip. So Glitch Trap is actually the Mimic, and there are many other connections in many games connecting the two. So really it's the Mimic chip that made these animatronics and the Glamrocks act strange or violent. Before we even knew of the Mimic from the Tales from the Pizzaplex novels or from his appearance in the FNAF Ruin DLC, the Mimic was essentially being teased in Help Wanted and in FNAF AR, through the virus and through the violent nature of the animatronics. This could also prove the idea that the Mimic was actually planned since the very beginning and wasn't retconned into the series with the release of Ruin. It's also been argued if Glitch Trap was supposed to be William Afton himself returning once more, or if he was the Mimic, planned to be the new villain since Help Wanted. There is plenty of evidence that goes both ways, but I've always personally believed that he was always supposed to be the Mimic, and that they were always supposed to represent the same thing. And the books, the emails, and Ruin all coming together making one coherent narrative only prove this idea even further. In scrapped emails and emails that did make it to the final game, we also learn of contractors that would make products for Fazbear's Entertainment like the animatronics. And in the trailer for the latest FNAF project, Secret of the Mimic, we learn the Mimic was created by a contractor in the year 1979, and was new technology being made just for Fazbear's Entertainment. These scenarios are identical, where the company would hire contractors to build technology for them, and it would make sense that the circuit boards that scanned the Mimic 1 chip came from the same contractor and warehouse where the Mimic was being stored in the events of Secret of the Mimic. Now, I'm not saying that these contractors being the same was planned since the development of Special Delivery, but it's not far-fetched to argue that now Stu was connecting the two and creating one single story, a story that is the same from the books, a story where the Mimic and the circuit boards came from the same contractor and warehouse. But for a quick disclaimer, I want to go over the idea of even using cut content to solve the FNAF lore. It's been argued that cut content shouldn't be used as evidence when theorizing because they were cut for a reason. It could have been because they didn't fit with the story anymore, because they changed their minds at certain characters or endings. And although I believe this as well, I also believe that it's okay to use cut content only as supporting evidence to things that we already knew about. For example, we've already been theorizing that Michael Afton is alive, but the email address is simply supporting evidence that he worked for the company. So if you disagree with using cut content for evidence, that is completely fine, so make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the scrapped emails from FNAF Special Delivery, and how it potentially solves the lore. So what do you guys think? Does this content help to solve the lore of the overarching story? So let me know if I should make a second part to this video, as there's a lot more unused content that I didn't discuss in this video that can be used to solve the FNAF lore. Moving on, let's now look at a new attraction that has had a major role so far, Fall Fest. Fall Fest is the latest attraction revealed in this new era of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, which has actually been here since the very beginning of the timeline. We first saw Fall Fest in the Dreadbear DLC, which is the core of this theory, and I'll get back to this later in the video. We then saw a poster for Fall Fest 1970 revealed in Help Wanted 2, and we also know that the newest project in the franchise releasing this year, FNAF Secret of the Mimic, will also be closely connected to Fall Fest based on information from the demo and from the Help Wanted 2 update. The antagonist of this game, the Mimic, who will also be known as Jackie, is donning a clown costume which is clearly related to a carnival. And I believe it was this simple carnival that was trying to tell us that every single pizzeria from the franchise is connected by one thing. And they've been doing this even with the latest FNAF project, Help Wanted 2. And up to this point, we would only get more references and Easter eggs to this carnival. In Security Breach, we found this arcade game of Balloon Boy which took place in a carnival, this poster advertising Fredbear's singing show. In Ruin, we saw these carnival animal mascot suits which we can also find in the trailer, and even the Mimic wore a carnival lion suit in the Scooper ending. We could also find these prize boxes with the same pattern as the Secret of the Mimic carpet found in the teaser trailer and in the Help Wanted 2 update where we found Jackie's box. Meaning these prize boxes were teasing this new game and time period this entire time, as we know Secret of the Mimic will take place in the year 1979. But finally, in Help Wanted 2, the Carousel and Carney minigame both took place in a carnival, and presumably took place in the Fall Fest event itself. So obviously Fall Fest has been teased since the very first Help Wanted game and will continue to have a major role in the future of this franchise. But how is this carnival the key to connecting all pizzerias while using evidence from the franchise's most mysterious minigame, Midnight Motorist? Well, to answer this, we first need to look at the Help Wanted Dreadbear DLC. This DLC features a Halloween theme hub mode consisting of 3 new game modes that contain 10 new minigames, all focused around this Halloween theme. We are also introduced to brand new animatronics like Grim Foxy and Dreadbear himself. And most importantly, we learn that this DLC also takes place within the Fall Fest Carnival, as the game's hub contains a banner advertising Fall Fest 1983, an important year for the franchise. And this hub alone is the key that connects all pizzerias to Fall Fest 83 and to the carnival itself, starting with this house off to the distance. If this house looks familiar, that's because it's actually the Afton family house from FNAF 4, as it's the exact same shape and layout, where the house sits on a hillside surrounded by trees and a forest. This is a small but important detail that some might have even missed, as this reveals to us that Fall Fest has always been near and right in front of the Afton family house this entire time. And to further prove this idea, we also find this car behind the monitors that looks like a simple truck with white headlights to the player. But you can change the truck's headlights by pressing a hidden button found on the side of the monitors, which actually turns the car's headlights purple, which is an obvious reference to a minigame I've already mentioned, Midnight Motorist. This hidden minigame is known for the many mysteries within it, like who is Orange Guy, what is this pile of dirt, what is the Juniors building, who is watching TV, and who is the runaway. But from this confusing minigame, it's assumed that this house is the Afton family house, and that Orange Guy is actually Purple Guy who's driving a purple car. The same purple car from the Charlie minigame in FNAF 2, and the same car we see in the Dreadbear DLC. Like I mentioned, the headlights turn purple, which is a clear reference to the purple car Midnight Motorist, which not only makes these cars the same, but it also makes the setting and location identical as well. Again, this confirms that Midnight Motorist house is the Afton house, which we find in the distance and surrounded by a forest, just like in Midnight Motorist. So if the cars and houses are the same, then what does this mean for Fall Fest and the setting in Midnight Motorist? Because we find the Afton family house and purple car in Midnight Motorist, that also means we should be able to find Fall Fest in this minigame as well, and it's actually been right under our nose this entire time. When lining up the layouts of the minigame for Midnight Motorist and the Dreadbear DLC, the only place Fall Fest and this barn could be is in this clearing where we can find this pile of dirt, which makes perfect sense as it's a wide enough area for the carnival, and the pile of dirt could be here to represent what used to be a barn. Where else would Fall Fest lie when lining up these two maps and minigames? And the car also being in this clearing could just be another way of connecting the two. And this actually isn't the only place we've seen this barn. Like I mentioned, it's assumed that the Carousel and Carney minigame both take place within Fall Fest. Because of their green skies, which matches up with the Fall Fest DLC, and because they're the only minigames that take place within a carnival. And when taking a closer look at the carousel minigame, behind the red we see what appears to be the exact same barn from the Fall Fest DLC, further proving that it's the same Fall Fest that is near the Afton family house and in the clearing. So now that we know Fall Fest has to be near the Afton house and is in this specific clearing next to the barn and next to the Midnight Motorist car, using this evidence we also know exactly where Fall Fest lies next to 3 other pizzerias from the franchise. When looking at the Help Wanted secret ending where the player can choose to go through this door instead of following Glitch Trap, we find a tease and setup to security breach where we find the Pizzaplex is under construction and is hiring, but that's not all. To the side of us and behind us we find the exact same car and barn that we could also find in the Fall Fest 83 event. The 2 cars are the exact same truck and even have the same imperfections in the exact same areas. They are also submerged and destroyed in the same way in both of these moments. The barns also appear to be identical with their similar shape and overall design, but the barn in the secret ending just seems to be fixed and remodeled. The barn is to the left of the car just like it is in the Dreadbear DLC. They are clearly meant to be the same thing in the same exact area, which would mean that the Pizzaplex was constructed right in front of what would have been Fall Fest. But by this point, many years later in the timeline, Fall Fest is nothing but a simple clearing in a forest. And not only would Fall Fest be close to the Pizzaplex, but we also know this would confirm that the Afton family house is somewhere off to the distance of the Pizzaplex. We even find the similar hills and mountains from the Dreadbear DLC where the house would have resided, but because we don't find anything, it could mean the house is destroyed by now. But the remains, the memories, and what's left of it is most definitely near the remains of Fall Fest and of the construction of a new era of the timeline, the Pizzaplex. And this isn't the last time we've seen of the Midnight Motorist car, as in Security Breach and in the sequel we once more find the exact same car. The same truck with the same headlights and imperfections, submerged into the rubble. If we know this is the Midnight Motorist car and that it's there to represent what areas are the same as the ones in the minigame, what area haven't we gone over yet that could match with the sequel? Well, that would simply be the Junior's location. It's been argued if this location is a bar, a Freddy's location, or even a new location that we haven't heard of before. But now with this car being in the sequel and right in front of our location, I believe they're the same. Junior's is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place from FNAF 6, which is now in the sequel. But you may be thinking that this can't be possible, as that location was made years after whenever Midnight Motorist would take place, and that would be correct. But what if it wasn't always Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place? What if it was a different pizzeria that would fit with the Midnight Motorist timeline? Fredbear's Family Diner. It's always been theorized that Junior's and Fredbear's were the same, but this would finally confirm it. It's also been believed that these 2 locations are the same because of all the Easter eggs this location and Security Breach have teasing Fredbear's. We could first find these 2 posters advertising Fredbear's Family Diner, and in Ruin and in the caves of the sequel, we could find this cardboard cutout of Fredbear. What if the reason this cutout ended up in the caves was because it came from the FNAF 6 pizzeria, which is directly above it? If it really is a remodeled Fredbear's, then of course they would still have pieces of merchandise and products from that time period, like a cardboard cutout of their center animatronic that would end up in the caves. It would also make sense story-wise that these 2 are the same, as Henry would want to end it all in the same place and location he started it all. So if these 2 really are the same, that means that Junior's or Fredbear's was also in front of the Fall Fest clearing this entire time, but is now under the Pizzaplex as a new pizzeria, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. So when looking at everything we've covered and when looking at Fall Fest as the key to connecting these locations and our starting point, Fall Fest is in this clearing. Junior's, which is actually Fredbear's, is in front of it, and the Afton family house is in front of that location. And years later, Junior's would become Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place and would then be under the Pizzaplex. So Fall Fest is right in front of Fredbear's Family Diner, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, and even the Pizzaplex, hence being the key to connecting these 4 attractions. Not only that, but Fall Fest is also the key to solving major parts of Midnight Motorist. Fall Fest tells us that the carnival was in this clearing, the pile of dirt could represent the barn, Junior's is actually Fredbear's Family Diner, and this house is the Afton family house, making Orange Guy a Purple Guy. We could even use parts of Fall Fest to solve other parts of this minigame, like saying that this green character could be someone like Edwin Murray, as he is a major character in the Mimic story who is connected to Fall Fest. That's why he could be talking to William Afton as if he already knew him. And when looking at these footprints outside of the window, they could belong to one of the animal mascot suits that we've already seen in Ruin or even in the Secret of the Mimic trailer, meaning someone or an endoskeleton was inside of it and was responsible for luring someone outside. But that's for another video, as although I talked a lot about Midnight Motorist in this video, I wasn't attempting to solve it, as I wanted to focus on the placements of all the pizzerias. But for some clarification, it can be argued that Fall Fest cannot be connected to FNAF 6 or Midnight Motorist, because it was introduced years after Pizzeria Simulator trailer, and it's hard to imagine that Scott Cawthon had all of this planned. Although this can be true, I do think Scott was teasing this carnival in some way with this poster that did come from FNAF 6 and from one of the cinematics. In the Scrap Trap cinematic, we find this poster, advertising Spookfest. This poster sounds and is familiar to Fall Fest, and in Fall Fest and in the barn I've discussed many times, we find the exact same poster. We also find these clown posters that also came from FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, which to me is trying to make it clear that Spookfest and Fall Fest are one and the same, meaning it did exist at the time FNAF 6 was created, just not as fleshed out as it is now. So although it's likely that everything wasn't planned since the start, by using evidence from newer games, we can start to fill in gaps of Midnight Motorist and its story. And I also believe, like the FNAF 4 box, that Midnight Motorist and its story has changed over time. When FNAF 6 was released, Midnight Motorist had a story, one that I think still hasn't been fully solved to this day. But as more games were released and as more lore was added, the story possibly changed to where it included Fall Fest. And something else that I haven't mentioned yet is the FNAF Secret of the Mimic warehouse. We know this game is going to take place in a warehouse that was owned by Edwin, and I've already made a video going over the theory and idea that the warehouse is actually under the FNAF 6 pizzeria and under the Pizzaplex. I went over evidence from the trailer that suggests the two areas are exactly the same, and other evidence like red bricks found throughout the Pizzaplex and sinkhole that could have only come from the warehouse. So make sure to check those videos out as well. But if this were true, that means that Fall Fest would be near the warehouse the entire time as well. But here where things start to get complicated and wouldn't align perfectly, as that would mean the warehouse is under Fredbear's Family Diner, but we know they're both open at around the same time, so this would be impossible. And especially when looking at the beginning of the trailer, it looks like the warehouse is not near a forest, like the many other areas we've discussed in Midnight Motorist. And really, this just brings me to my final point. This video is just a theory. By no means am I saying that anything I've said is 100% canon or even true. These are just connections that I and others have made, possibly connecting Fall Fest to other pizzerias. I'm also aware of implications like the Midnight Motorist car ending up from Fall Fest to the Pizzaplex and in the sinkhole, as in the ending, the Pizzaplex is well under construction. So was it moved there for some reason? Are they two separate cars? Is this even the Midnight Motorist car? Again, it could go either way, but because they're the same, because we see a similar pattern within these games and minigames, I believe it has to mean something. So although we still don't know exactly where Fall Fest lies within the story or timeline, I believe we can start to theorize about it by using evidence from the Dreadbird DLC. But with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on Fall Fest and where I believe it's the key that connects all pizzerias. So what do you guys think? Remember, this video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed, so if you disagree, that is completely fine, so make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. And finally, let's look at the newest FNAF Secret of the Mimic trailer and how it might be the key to solving the FNAF security breach Pizzaplex. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic will be the latest installment to the franchise, and most recently the trailer was released revealing new lore and gameplay. Although this trailer's been out for a short period of time, I believe it confirms one of the biggest theories behind the warehouse that will directly connect this game to FNAF Security Breach and Pizzeria Simulator. A theory that connects all pizzerias to one location. A theory that believes the warehouse has been right under our radar this entire time. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the FNAF Secret of the Mimic warehouse and of the Security Breach Pizzaplex. Now, I've made a few videos attempting to solve this theory that the warehouse or factory from FNAF Secret of the Mimic is directly under the Pizzaplex and under the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. With the very first video on this topic, by using evidence from the demo of Secret of the Mimic and the description of what the warehouse looked like, I began by comparing the location under the sinkhole to the warehouse, by comparing things as simple as the walls, stairs, and overall design, and also by pointing out all the similarities and differences that were available at the time. I also went over how odd it was to have animal mascot suits in the sinkhole, as it was unknown how they ended up there and why they look so old. Well, what if they weren't brought to the Pizzaplex? What if they've always been in this location and never left? That's why they're so old, and that's why they're in this room. The exact same logic would also apply to this cardboard cutout of Fredbear in the actual caves. The reason it's randomly here is because it never left the location. I also went over the design of this location and how it's almost built into the caves, showing how old it really is. With the second video, I went over how these red bricks that were found all around the Pizzaplex actually came from the warehouse. They were in different rooms, areas of the Pizzaplex, and most importantly, they were in the sinkhole. They were at the entrance with the Freddy head, they were in the caves, and they were also the foundation of the wall at the entrance and the exit to the caves, again proving they were from this location and proving these bricks were built into the caves. There were also these vintage TVs that were found with the bricks in the Pizzaplex, and these TVs come from the late 1970s. And when does FNAF Secret of the Mimic take place? That's right, the year 1979. And finally, with the most recent video, I went over how prize boxes found in the sinkhole were teasing this future game this entire time. Here we found prize boxes with the exact same pattern as the carpet from the teaser trailer and from the room in the Help Wanted 2 update. These prize boxes were found only in the sinkhole and in areas that I believe were a part of the warehouse. To me, all of these pieces of evidence were more than enough to prove that the warehouse is under the Pizzaplex, meaning the Mimic has been down there since 1979, and even Gregory supports this idea in the canon ending. But now with the official trailer finally being released, I believe it just further proves this idea, and I also believe it's going to be one of the big reveals of this game. Starting with the most obvious connections and similarities, it's being heavily believed that some of the rooms shown in the trailer are the exact same rooms and hallways we find in Ruin and Security Breach. Starting with the very beginning of the trailer, it looks like this room where we find all of the mascot suits and cardboard cutouts of different characters is the exact same room as the one we find right after exiting the caves. The layout of the room is identical, and there are also similar storage shelves on each side of the room, and in both rooms we find similar boxes and storage units. And in Ruin, this room would have been where we could have found the Secret of the Mimic prize boxes, as it would have been in the very corner of the room, which would again confirm that these two areas are the same. And just by looking at the rooms side to side, it's hard to deny that they were designed to be identical. In Ruin, the room is simply missing the mascot suits and cardboard cutouts of characters. Earlier in the video, I mentioned the Fredbear cutout being in the caves as supporting evidence, and in this room we find many more cardboard cutouts of characters and animals. We find a lion, a sheep, and even a jester, which did have a role with the Mimic in the novels. So what if Fredbear came from this room where everything else was stored, but would eventually end up in a different area, which would then become the caves in Ruin? But moving on to this room where the player is winding up this toy, it can be argued that it resembles the room where Candy Cadet resides in. The layouts are similar yet again, and this store would be in the exact same place as this store that leads to stairs. There are also the same storage shelves, and in Ruin we find the red bricks scattered around the room that would have come from the walls of the warehouse. But this doesn't mean that Candy Cadet originated from this factory, as we know he comes from FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, and it makes more sense that he was just moved to this area once construction started on the Pizzaplex. But finally, what I think is the most compelling piece of evidence, let's look at this hallway where the Jackie chase sequence takes place. Now, I don't think we can find the exact room in Ruin, but instead I think the lighting and structure design are similar to these areas in Ruin where the stairs begin. When looking at the very end of the hallway, we see wooden planks and this very specific oval-shaped orange light, and in Ruin we find wooden planks and a oval-shaped orange light. These are the exact same designs, and specifically it's almost impossible to deny that the lights are supposed to be the same, and that they're even on the same area of the wall. When looking at these two side by side, there's no other simple way to put it, but they're both the same. I think it's clear that Stuart Studios is trying to tell us that this was on purpose and that they're the same for a reason. These wooden planks were actually what I focused on in the very first video, so seeing identical ones in the trailer finally feels like a form of confirmation. But I quickly want to look at the very last shot before Music Man jump scares us, and here we find stairs with metal railings. And these metal railings are very similar to the ones surrounding the stairs in Ruin. Although the exact areas aren't the same, I do believe the railings are. But for supporting evidence from the very start of the trailer that connects to the Help Wanted 2 update, let's look at this blue van. It's assumed that the protagonist who we will play as arrives at the warehouse in this blue van with a new Fazbear's Entertainment logo. And we find the exact same blue van in Help Wanted 2. After finding all of the puzzle pieces, the picture will reveal the location where Secret of the Mimic will take place, which we now know is a warehouse, and flipping it over would reveal a mysterious van. Finishing the puzzle would also cause the warehouse itself to appear right in front of you while wearing the Vanny mask, and with it off, the blue van will then appear, also revealing that Mexus is in the back. After entering a code that was found on the building, Mexus will appear for a brief moment before being sucked back into the machine while the van drives off. So what does this mean? Well, if we know the protagonist is behind the wheel and that they arrived in the warehouse in this blue van, that also means that Mexus ends up in this van either at the start or at the end of the game. To me, it makes the most sense that in this scene when he arrives, Mexus is already in the van. We know the player is attempting to retrieve the Mimic to return him back to Fazbear's Entertainment, so what if the company sent the player with Mexus to make the retrieval much easier? A part of the gameplay could be setting up Mexis to disable the Mimic for a certain amount of time, and the Help Wanted 2 update was showing us the player delivering him to the warehouse. But what does this mean in terms of the warehouse being under the Pizzaplex? Well, I want to follow the exact same logic I've used all video now with Mexis. He wasn't brought here by Gregory and Vanessa like it was previously believed. He was brought here by an employee in 1979 and never left the warehouse. That's why Mexis looks so old and almost a part of this room. This machine has been here for decades and has been stuck here ever since it completed its purpose in keeping the Mimic trapped. If he does actually originate from 1979, that could mean that William Afton or Henry Emily had a part in its creation, especially if Fazbear's Entertainment would send this machine with the employee to the warehouse. And throughout the game, I actually do believe we'll find out who created Mexis and why. But when looking back to the location in Ruin, we find this scooping room, which actually played a role in one of the endings where the Mimic was scooped out of the lion mascot suit. If this area really is in the warehouse, this means the scooper is a part of the warehouse and also came from 1979. And this actually makes a lot of sense when looking at the context of the trailer. We see the Mimic switching from mascot suit to suit. We see him in Jackie, the mushroom suit, the elephant suit from Ruin, and even in the Tiger Rock plushie costume from Help Wanted 2. So the scooper existed in the warehouse to remove endoskeletons from the mascot suits. Maybe the scooper will even play a role in removing the Mimic from one of the mascot suits, just like it did in Ruin. So does this mean that Edwin Murray created the scooper here, or was it Fazbear's Entertainment? Well, this is something we still don't know, but I'm sure will also be revealed throughout the events of the game. But finally, what does this all mean for the layout of the Pizzaplex? Well, it's all connected. On the very top we have the Pizzaplex, underneath it we have the FNAF 6 Pizzeria, and underneath that is the warehouse from Secret of the Mimic. But that's not all. It's also believed that the FNAF 6 location was actually a revamped version of Fredbear's Family Diner, which could be why we find posters advertising this location in Security Breach. And the Fredbear cutout could have come from this location and not the warehouse, which is why it ended up in the caves. It's also believed that the FNAF warehouse and sister location bunker also somehow fit within the Pizzaplex. Now really the only evidence is the scooper room in Michael Afton's room, which is why I don't really think this is possible. But if it somehow is, this means the Pizzaplex would contain locations from FNAF 4, sister location, Pizzeria Simulator, and now Secret of the Mimic, which is a lot. But this would mean that Henry Emily was fully aware of the warehouse, as he chose this location above it to be the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. Maybe we'll even learn that he has a much closer connection to this warehouse and to Edwin Murray than we previously believed. Again, I only believe the warehouse and FNAF 6 location are under the Pizzaplex, but more locations could be revealed in the future, especially in a future game where we do return to the Pizzaplex. But with all that said, using evidence from the Secret of the Mimic demo, from the design of the warehouse and structure of the ruin location, from the red bricks scattered around the Pizzaplex, from the mascot suits and Mexis, I believe we can confidently say that the warehouse is under the Pizzaplex. But with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the warehouse. So what do you guys think? Is this location really under the FNAF 6 Pizzeria? Remember, this video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed, so make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. But with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed my attempts to solve 3 of the biggest mysteries from this duo FNAF games. So what do you guys think? Do the scrapped FNAF AR emails solve the lore? Is Fall Fest the key to connecting all pizzerias? And is the FNAF Secret of the Mimic warehouse under the Pizzaplex? So make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. Now let's solve the newest trailer for FNAF Secret of the Mimic and everything we know about it so far. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic will be the latest installment to the franchise, and 2 days ago the official trailer was released, revealing new characters, gameplay, and mechanics. This trailer tells us a lot about the objective of this game and about the Mimic's new role throughout the different events of this game. So in this video, I'm going to go over everything you need to know about the trailer by attempting to solve it, by going over every single old and new piece of lore revealed, and by analyzing every Easter egg and detail to help us connect the pieces. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the FNAF Secret of the Mimic trailer. There is a lot of information revealed from the single trailer, so I'm going to attempt to cover everything from the characters, animatronics, how this game connects to past and future games, and how it's even connected to the tales from the Pizzaplex novels. So let's solve the FNAF Secret of the Mimic trailer by first going over one of the biggest lore reveals in the history of the franchise. But first, let's take a full look at the trailer.
So let me explain the situation. One of our contractors, Edwin Murray, has gone missing, leaving our property abandoned in his warehouse. Your job is simple. Enter the warehouse and retrieve the technology that he was developing for us. It's a kind of prototype endoskeleton that can adapt to any costume and become any character. We suspect it may be malfunctioning, so just be aware of the slim but non-zero chance that you could sustain significant injuries while attempting to retrieve it, including, but not limited to, death or dismemberment. We fully expect the retrieval process to go smoothly and without incident. But just in case, we suggest you get your affairs in order before arriving.
Back to work.
Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to property or person. Thank you for being a valued member of the Fazbear team.
Right off the bat, this trailer just confirmed that the tales from the Pizzaplex novels are now canon to the main game's timeline, and this is done with the single name drop of Edwin Murray. Edwin was responsible for creating the Mimic in the books, and ever since the Mimic was introduced into the games, it's been heavily debated if the books were canon, if they were parallel to the games, or if they were in a separate continuity. But now with Edwin officially being named in the games, and with other appearances of animatronics and characters that I'll get back to later in this video, it's hard to deny that the books are now canon. But we also learned that Edwin is a contractor for Fazbear's Entertainment but has gone missing and has left the warehouse abandoned. And these events actually match up with what happens in the books, as Edwin leaves the company and his factory after his son's death, which is why he's missing. And we also learn that Fazbear's Entertainment owns some of the equipment in the factory, which matches up once more with the novels as they send Edwin various mascot costume suits. It's possible that Edwin could make a small appearance in this game or that he's referenced more times, but I don't think this is likely as we know Edwin stays missing until his return in the Pizzaplex many decades later. But now moving on to the main focus of this game and a character we already know so much about, the Mimic. We first learn that the protagonist, who we will play as, must retrieve the technology that Edwin was developing for Fazbear's Entertainment, which is an endoskeleton prototype that can adapt to any costume and become any character, the Mimic. We learn that the Mimic is malfunctioning and can be very dangerous, and we actually get many looks at the Mimic in many different costumes. Now ever since this game was announced, and more specifically this animatronic Jackie was revealed, it's been debated if the Mimic will actually be inside of this animatronic or if he was just controlling her. But now we know that the Mimic will not only be inside of this animatronic, but that he will be inside of multiple mascot suits and will don many characters. And the key that gives this away are his infamous orange eyes. We already know the Mimic has orange eyes, based on his description in the books and based on the design in Ruin, so every time we see orange eyes, that's the Mimic. We first see orange eyes in Jackie, from the teaser trailer and from the trailer art scene here, where Jackie's eyes are missing and cracked, revealing the Mimic's eyes. We then see orange eyes in this yellow and blue mushroom mascot costume that we actually know about in the books. And we get another shot of the mushroom walking around the factory. I also believe that the Mimic is inside of this elephant suit that we've already seen in the Mimic's lair in Ruin. But here it looks much newer and cleaner, as we already know this game is taking place at the earliest point in the timeline in 1979. Although we don't see the Mimic's orange eyes because the mascot still has its own eyes, I think it's safe to assume that the Mimic will also don an elephant throughout the events of this game. But finally, we get glimpses of the Tiger Rock costume from the books and from Help Wanted 2. This Tiger Rock plushie has been a major part of the Mimic's character, as Edwin's son David owned one in the books, and the Mimic would even get one of his own later on. Tiger Rock would then become a full-fledged animatronic with blue and green eyes, and we even got our first glimpse of how this plushie looked in Help Wanted 2 and in the small update. But now in Secret of the Mimic, we're also made aware of a mascot suit version of the Tiger Rock plushie that we can also assume the Mimic will wear at one point in the game, and it makes the most sense that it's the last suit he will wear in this game. We can assume the Mimic will start in the Jackie animatronic, as that's who's been the face of the game so far, and it's who we saw for a few shots of the trailer. Then for some reason the Mimic will move on to other mascot suits like the mushroom and elephant suit. He could also wear suits that we don't see in the trailer, like the bird and lion costume from the Ruin DLC, or he could wear any of the mascot suits we saw throughout the trailer. He might even wear Jackie multiple times, as a weathered version of this animatronic is in the teaser and in the trailer art. But most importantly, I believe he will finally end up in the Tiger Rock suit. That's why we see it the least in the trailer. It's setting up this big reveal in this important mascot suit. Maybe after the suit is destroyed, we will finally see the Mimic's full design in 1979, as up to this point we would only see the Mimic's orange eyes throughout the mascot suits. Which also brings me to the eyes themselves. Here we see the orange eyes have a spiral design, which is a very different design to the orange eyes we see in Ruin. Although the Mimic's eyes look very different, we can still assume that it's the Mimic, as he goes through various arms, legs, torsos, and eyes in the franchise. So these spiraled orange eyes are just the eyes we see in Secret of the Mimic, but again, the orange color color is what makes them the same. But finally, moving on to other characters and animatronics revealed, let's first look at the new protagonist. It's revealed that we play as an employee of Fazbear's Entertainment, but as far as information goes, this is everything we know. Is it someone from the books? From the games? Why them? Have we seen them anywhere else in the franchise? And will they return in the future? These are a lot of questions that we can't really answer now, but what we might know is when they arrived at the warehouse. In the novels, we know that two separate teams, two separate times, were sent to the factory to attempt to retrieve the Mimic, but they both ultimately failed and were murdered by the Mimic. So it makes sense that the protagonist was sent to the warehouse after the first team failed or after the second team. And this would be how Fazbear's Entertainment knew that the Mimic was malfunctioning, as he already harmed two teams. And this would also fill in gaps of the story from the books and would add new lore into the games, which is why I believe the protagonist will be someone from the books. So although we don't know exactly who we are going to play as, we can assume it's someone who arrived after the two teams, and we actually see the other team in this game. In one of the shots focusing on the elephant mascot, we see what appears to be a human arm popping out of it, meaning there's most likely a dead body inside of it. It makes sense that the Mimic would stuff the dead bodies inside of different mascot suits, and that's what we see happening with the elephant mascot. This also means that more murders happen within Fazbear's Entertainment that we never heard about within the main game's timeline. And maybe a big part of this game will be uncovering the mystery and memories of these murdered employees. But moving on to other animatronics, and starting with this nurse animatronic named Dolly. Dolly seems to be a humanoid character that looks similar to animatronics from FNAF 2 and even Sister Location. We also see a retro version of Music Man that originated from this factory and from 1979. He has a similar but very different design to Music Man from Security Breach, and it looks like he's attacking the player from the rooftop. The design seems to resemble an old music box with the arms coming out of it, and his arms also resemble construction cranes, and in general his design resembles construction equipment and tools like his mouth. But it makes sense that the Mimic isn't wearing or is inside of these animatronics, as they aren't mascots like the other suits, and they don't have the Mimic's orange eyes, which would make them the same. Instead, I think that they're security animatronics that detect the protagonist as some sort of threat, which is why they're after them. There might also be other security animatronics that will also be a threat that weren't shown in the trailer, alongside the Mimic who will be switching from suit to suit. We also find an older version of the staff bot, which appears to be a staff bot who sorts the mail based on his hat. He also has no legs as his body is attached to a paper shredder, but we actually already saw this bot in the demo for Secret of the Mimic, where Jackie picked up the staff bot and threw them into a different room. But all this just means that the staff bots have been a part of the company for much longer than we realized and have been around much earlier than FNAF Security Breach. But moving on and looking at the beginning of the trailer, we have someone telling us what the situation is, as he's the one who tells us that Edwin is missing and that we have to retrieve the Mimic. And many fans, including myself, believe that this might be Hand Unit from FNAF Sister Location and from many other FNAF games. Or it could be someone different, but it makes sense that these voice lines would still work the same as other games, where he would be the one checking in on us at certain checkpoints and he would be the one to guide us throughout the game, like Hand Unit or even Phone Guy from the first two FNAF games. In every game there's someone guiding us, and in Secret of the Mimic, it makes sense that it's going to be the character from the start of the trailer. But finally, to end off this video, let's look at every Easter egg and small detail from the trailer, starting with the other mascot suits. We first see these two dogs, the elephant costume that is different from the one in Ruin, the Tiger Rock mascot, the same elephant suit from Ruin, the mushroom, and finally there's this mascot that I'm not really clear what it is, so what do you guys think? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts. But most of these mascots actually appear in the books like the mushroom, so by seeing them here, the franchise is once more confirming that the books are now canon. There are also cardboard cutouts of different suits that once more appear in the books, like this jester costume which actually played a major role with the Mimic's character. We find a dog, a sheep, a lion, and this alligator. We can also find the exact same posters we found in FNAF Security Breach advertising Fredbear's Family Diner in this hallway where we saw the elephant suit. We find posters from the factory advertising the safety protocols and procedures that were actually in display at the PAX West demo. Moving on this terminal we see the very first version of Helpy, who has been a memorable character of the franchise that has appeared in multiple FNAF projects. He first appeared in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, so it's believed that he was based off of Funtime Freddy, who appeared in Sister Location, but now we know it's actually the opposite. Helpy's appearance in Secret of the Mimic means Funtime Freddy was most likely based on this design, and it's interesting to see the very first iteration of an infamous character. And now with looking at some of the mechanics of the game, we first learned that there are going to be multiple doors with multiple ways of opening them. Crank gift boxes are back from Security Breach and Ruin, as we find the very first version version of them behind the staff bot in the security office. We also find an older and first edition of the Faz wrench that is used when accessing the terminal, but they still have a very similar design and identical gameplay. But finally, when accessing the terminal screen, it looks like the player needs executive access for something. It could be something related to the Mimic or something as simple as entering a new area. But maybe when finding a way to unlock executive access, we will learn more about Edwin Murray and how he was specifically connected to Fazbear's Entertainment. But with that, this is my attempt to solve the FNAF Secret of the Mimic trailer, and this is everything we know about it so far. Based on this trailer alone, it already looks like it's gonna have a massive effect on the lore by clearing things up and by answering some of the biggest mysteries from the entire franchise. I also believe that the game will not only confirm but expand on the idea that the books are now canon to the games by showing the events of the two are the same and by showing the characters are also the exact same. FNAF Secret of the Mimic will be releasing on June 13th of this year, which is a lot sooner than many fans expected, so what do you guys think? Are you guys excited? What did you think of the trailer? And how will this game connect to future and past Five Nights at Freddy's games? Now let's go over 3 of the biggest mysteries from FNAF Secret of the Mimic and how we can possibly solve them. Starting with who we will play as, what if the player is connected to 2 other major characters from the franchise, making one new family? There isn't much evidence to go off of to theorize who we will play as, and the trailer doesn't really introduce any new lore or evidence. So I want to cover a possibility that makes the most sense narratively and would connect itself to the newer and older games in the FNAF franchise. The solution would follow a family, 3 generations facing off against one major threat who keeps coming back, the Mimic, who will also be known as Jackie. And the family would be known as what I've begun to call the Bonnie family. Cassie from Ruin, Cassie's dad from Help Wanted 2, who is also Bonnie Bro from FNAF 4, and Cassie's grandfather from FNAF Secret of the Mimic. What if in this newest FNAF game we play as Bonnie Bro's dad, who also worked for Fazbear's Entertainment? But first, let's go over everything we do know about the protagonist. The trailer opens with Han Unit telling us and the player that a contractor for Fazbear's Entertainment named Edwin Murray has gone missing and has left his warehouse abandoned. In that warehouse, he left behind new technology that he was developing, which is an endoskeleton prototype that can adapt to any costume and become any character, the Mimic. We learn that the Mimic is malfunctioning and can be very dangerous, and we actually got many looks at the Mimic in many different costumes. Now this is important information that I will relate back to the protagonist and to the other members of the Bonnie family later in the video. But so far, all we know about this mysterious character is that they work for Fazbear's and were hired to retrieve the Mimic, which doesn't tell us who they are. However, we do actually get our first look at their design into a uniform the other employees are wearing. In many shots of the trailer, we see them wearing a green sweater or jacket with yellow gloves. And we can assume this is a uniform, as in this shot of an elephant mascot suit, it looks like a body was actually stuffed inside of it, presumably by the Mimic, and they're wearing the same green jacket and yellow gloves. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex novels, we learn that 2 other teams were sent to retrieve the Mimic, but both groups were killed by the Mimic and stuffed into mascot suits, which is exactly what we see here. But the uniform design doesn't tell us anything else about the player either, and we also don't get any voice lines from them or anyone else giving us clues. So instead, let's look at this mystery narratively, and what would make the most sense and what would be the most satisfying. So let's look at the Bonnie family one by one. In the Ruin DLC, we play as Cassie, who is a new character in the series revealed to be Gregory's friend. Throughout this game, we learn a lot about her dad through these small clues, like the fact that he worked as a technician for Fazbear's Entertainment when she reveals that her dad has a Faz wrench just like the one she found. We also learn that her dad's favorite animatronic was Bonnie when she finds this Bonnie lunchbox, and this is a very important clue that plays a big role with the installment released directly after Ruin. We also find this note that we've assumed came from Cassie's dad. Gone for a while, money for food on counter, emergency contacts on fridge, showing that he left her alone at one point to go somewhere that she wasn't aware of, and this somewhere is revealed in FNAF Up 1 and 2, which actually takes place in the timeline before Ruin. In this game, we follow a person who is completing tasks in the virtual and real world. It's believed that this person ventured down to the sinkhole and to the abandoned FNAF 6 pizzeria to complete the final Princess Quest arcade machine to free Vanessa. In Security Breach, we also learn that this person completed the first 2 arcade machines and accused Fazbear's Entertainment of hiding the glitch in the arcades. They also stated that the princess was testing them and that they weren't worthy yet, not until they completed the last machine. But in the exit interview message, they were being let go as they begged to stay one more night to save the princess, and this person is none other than Cassie's dad. He is able to complete the last machine all the way in Help Wanted 2, so the story comes full circle. We know this because he also had a Faz wrench like Cassie described, Carney says he looks old enough to have kids, and in the bad ending, we see Cassie's Cassie's dad's mind transferred into a staff bot by the Nightmare bots, the same staff bot from the beginning of Ruin. In this ending, we see the same moment from Ruin when Cassie finds the Vanny mask, but this time from the perspective of the staff bot, meaning Cassie's dad is now inside of this staff bot, and he was the one who handed his daughter the Vanny mask. While playing the final arcade machine, there's an Easter egg that also reveals Cassie's dad is the exact same person as someone from FNAF 4. After completing some levels and defeating the glitch, you will find these gravestones with plushies next to them, and after lighting them in a specific order, a secret stairway will open, and there you will find a chest. When opening it, inside is a Bonnie mask with the message, "This looks familiar." It's been theorized that her dad is the same character as this boy wearing the Bonnie mask from the FNAF 4 ending, who is Bonnie Bro. The reason the mask is familiar is because it's the same one he wore on that night, and it's also why Cassie says that Bonnie is her dad's favorite animatronic. Some of the biggest themes of Help Wanted 2 is the idea of accepting the past, giving memories life, and moving on. The player accepts the past by collecting plushies of every victim of the missing children incident. He gives their memories life by lighting their gravestones in the same order that they were tragically murdered. And he finally moves on by finding a memory from his own traumatic past. The mask he wore when he was responsible for murdering an innocent person by throwing the crying child into Fredbear's mouth. After he finds the mask, he is able to trade the glitch trap plushie to the old king, which is the only reason Vanessa is able to become free. This simple Bonnie mask was the key to finally beating the Princess Quest arcade machines. But now that we know Cassie was the protagonist in Ruin, and that her dad was the protagonist in Help Wanted 2, how can Cassie's grandfather be the protagonist in Secret of the Mimic? Well, when we started with Ruin and Cassie, each game that releases after follows the last generation. Help Wanted 2 focuses on her father, and the next game would focus on her grandfather. Each game would also move back more in time, as Help Wanted 2 took place sometime before Ruin, and Secret of the Mimic takes place decades before any of those games. Also in FNAF 4, because Cassie's dad is Bonnie Bro, that means he was actually friends with Michael Afton, who was wearing this Foxy mask, one that even showed up in Ruin. And what if the reason they were even friends, and the reason they were always in the pizzeria together, is because both their dads worked for the company? Michael's dad, William Afton, was the CEO of Fazbear's Entertainment, and Bonnie Bro's dad could have been a technician for the company and was sent to retrieve the Mimic. In the trailer, he even uses a similar Faz wrench to the one Cassie and her dad use, as it has the same two prongs and screen on it. It's used to access the terminal or screen, and it could also be used to unlock doors or machinery like it's used in Ruin or Help Wanted to access multiple rooms. This Faz wrench is just a much older version of the other models we've seen, as Secret of the Mimic will take place in the year 1979, 4 years before FNAF 4. So if Bonnie Bro's dad worked for Fazbear's Entertainment and also had to face the Mimic through the events of this game, this could be a reason why Bonnie Bro ever decided to work for the company when he was an adult and as a technician, as his dad also was a technician, worked for the company, and even owned a Faz wrench like the one he would own years later. Narratively, this would make the most sense, as we are following the same family attempting to stop the Mimic. Bonnie Bro's dad attempted to stop Jackie or the Mimic in multiple mascot suits in 1979. Bonnie Bro attempted to stop the Mimic as Glitch Trap in Help Wanted 2 by completing the final Princess Quest arcade machine and by freeing Vanessa. And finally, Cassie attempted to stop him in Ruin when she accidentally freed him. Now I think this idea will be revealed slowly throughout Secret of the Mimic, similar to Ruin, where we learn that the player has a son, whose favorite animatronic is Bonnie. We can assume this game will also have collectibles like every Steelwolf FNAF game has had, and maybe every collectible will have a message under it from the player, exactly how Ruin did. The player could find something like a Bonnie plush and the message could be anything like, "My son's favorite was always Bonnie." Or we might even find the exact same Bonnie mask from FNAF 4 and Help Wanted 2. Based on the warehouse design from Help Wanted 2, we see the front of it is advertising masks and gifts. So what if while the player is attempting to retrieve the Mimic, he picked up a Bonnie mask, the same Bonnie mask he would eventually give to Bonnie Bro, and that's why it's so cherished to him. And really, Stu was actively introducing the new family that we will follow throughout the next couple of FNAF games, the Bonnie family. For years we followed the Afton family, and this was slowly revealed as more games were released, and the exact same thing is happening with this family. It's slowly being revealed that they are all connected, and it's clear that it's this family that are all attempting to take down the Mimic once and for all. And currently it looks like Bonnie is what is connecting the three members of the family. Alongside Bonnie being Bonnie Bro's favorite, we can also assume that he was liked by Cassie, as she wonders what happened to him and why he was replaced. The protagonist here could also voice their interest in Bonnie, maybe even when he finds a mascot version of this character. But this brings me to the voice lines themselves, and the fact that we might not get any from this player. In both FNAF Security Breach and Ruin, we got voice lines from both main players, but then in the VR Help Wanted games, we had no voice lines from the person we played as. So it looks like the characters in the VR games don't get voice lines, but characters in flat game modes do. But Secret Secret of the Mimic is reportedly going to be both. In the trailer we got footage from the flat mode, but we also learned you should be able to play the game in VR mode, so really getting voice lines from the player could go either way. But even if we don't get voice lines, the protagonist will be important and will have some impact on the overarching story and lore. Gregory, Cassie, and her father have all had an impact in their own ways and have all solidified their roles in the lore, so why wouldn't the same apply to the main player for Secret of the Mimic? They will have an impact to the story in their own way, and I believe it's through a new family. And I think it's clear that we are going to follow this new family, the Bonnie family, in this new era of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. So with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video where I go over a possibility of who the protagonist and main player will be in FNAF Secret of the Mimic. Remember, this video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed, so what do you guys think? Who will we play as in FNAF Secret of the Mimic? So make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. Now let's look back to the trailer and the many new characters introduced. This trailer revealed new animatronics and mascot suits that the Mimic will wear, like this character based on a clown who will be known as Jackie and this orange and blue mushroom mascot suit. But one of these new animatronics stands out for its design and purpose that might connect them to the franchise's most mysterious project. So let's look at a carnival nurse animatronic and why she might be the key to solving Five Nights at Freddy's sister location and even parts of William Afton's motives. Dolly is the latest animatronic added to the long roster of different animatronics, and she is featured for a slight second towards the end of the trailer, appearing to chase the player. She appears to be more of a humanoid animatronic, and her design is clearly based on a nurse, as she is wearing an old style green and white uniform with the name tag reading Dolly. However, she does appear to be withered or destroyed, as it looks like parts of the animatronic are decaying, and she's even missing her feet entirely. Although we know the Mimic will be going from suit to suit throughout the events of this game, I don't think the Mimic is ever going to wear Dolly, because she seems to be her own separate character, and especially since she doesn't have the Mimic's orange eyes that we've seen with other animatronics and mascots, which is a giveaway that the Mimic is inside. She could simply see the player as a security threat, which is why she's even trying to target them. But what's the purpose of Dolly? Well, I don't think she was just based on a nurse, I think she is the actual nurse attending the warehouse. We know Secret of the Mimic will take place in a warehouse owned by Edwin Murray, who is a contractor for Fazbear's Entertainment developing new technology for them. So we can assume Dolly would act as the nurse of the warehouse and attend all employees in need of medical help. We already know staff bots also worked at the warehouse, like this staff bot sorting the mail, so it makes sense Dolly had a similar purpose. These posters could be found in the PAX West demo and in the actual trailer, warning employees of how dangerous the warehouse can really be, like this one about exposed wiring, implying that there have been multiple incidents already that Dolly would once more take care of, but this isn't actually the first time we've seen or heard this character. In FNAF Up 1 and 2 and in the Lefty 8 levels, you had to attempt to cure Lefty while also fighting off animatronics like Lefty and Scrap Baby. There is also a voice in the background giving you directions on what to do, and the voice is coming from a quote-unquote carnival nurse, which to me was a clear tease and setup for Dolly. We know Secret of the Mimic was being teased through the code word carnival, like in Ruin where this message from the developers was found, and the tease here was a prize box with the same pattern as the carpet from the Secret of the Mimic teaser and from the carpet in the Help 1 and 2 update. So the carnival nurse is the Secret of the Mimic nurse, which is again Dolly, and I wouldn't be surprised if the same voice was used for her once more in Secret of the Mimic, and it would even be a fun callback.
Welcome to First Aid. This training session simulates actual emergency situations you will encounter on a day-to-day basis.
But now I want to focus on her design and how it could relate to William Afton. Well, her humanoid design is something unique that we rarely see, and it already puts her in a small group with other animatronics that also appear human. Balloon Boy was our first example of this, as he's based on a real person, and his design also looks to be related to a carnival, as we've already seen him in attractions like this carousel. But the next and final time we saw human-like characters was in FNAF's sister location in the Funtime animatronics. Excluding Funtime Freddy and Foxy, every other animatronic seems to look human, especially Ballora, the Mini-Renas, and the Biddy Babs. Their moving faceplates would allow for more human reactions and emotions. The overall structure of the endoskeletons also felt human, where the wires overlapped each other, almost looking like muscle. We can also find human robot heads scattered around the bunker, but why? We know William Afton owns the Funtime animatronics under his company Afton Robotics, so it was his choice to design them like that, and their designs are simply one of the biggest mysteries of sister location. So how could Dolly be the answer or solution to this this mystery? Well, I believe it's through the services from Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals. This service would allow the customers to rent out the Funtime animatronics for private events and parties. Through the source code, we even learned that Funtime Chica was being rented out, and that was the reason she wasn't present throughout the events of this game. And I believe that we're seeing the exact same service in Secret of the Mimic and with Dolly. Because we know William Afton was responsible for creating all humanoid characters, then it also makes sense he was responsible for creating Dolly. She even has similar faceplates to the rest of the Funtimes, a design choice clearly by William. So applying the same reasoning to Dolly, what if William also rented her out to the warehouse as an animatronic that could oversee all medical care in the building? Which is why she seems so human, and why she would end up in the warehouse, as she almost seems out of place. We mainly see mascots like the mushroom or elephant in the warehouse, and any other animatronic we do see is closely related to a carnival or the theme. Jackie is based on a clown like I mentioned, and it can also be argued that the older version of DJ Music Man also fits the design or aesthetic of the warehouse. But Dolly is based on a human, a nurse that would help the employees. If anything, she seems to be a Funtime animatronic that was loaned by William Afton. So not only would this mean that Afton Robotics existed at the time of Secret of the Mimic, 1979, but it would also mean that the entertainment and rental service also existed, which is where Dolly came from. This information could completely change the lore and timeline, as it's believed Afton Robotics was created after Elizabeth Afton died, and after William was possibly fired from Fazbear's Entertainment. So this could change the placement of Elizabeth's death or even when such a location takes place. But the impact FNAF Secret of the Mimic would have on the entire lore and timeline is for a future video I'm working on. But this could also mean that Balloon Boy was rented to the FNAF 2 location, which would explain why he seems so out of place. And it would also mean that William Afton was responsible for creating this animatronic, and that it was his choice to include him in the pizzeria. It's already been believed that the Funtime animatronics resemble humans because that's who they would have constantly been around whenever they were rented. Like Dolly, they needed them to appear human as that's who they would have been entertaining or even helping. This would make the overall experience even more realistic and genuine, a possible goal of William Afton. Although the answer seems simple, Dolly would finally solve why William Afton made his animatronics so human and for how long he was renting animatronics to customers. But we actually know that most of the Funtime animatronics were never rented or let go from the underground bunker where they were being held in. This could have been after Circus Baby killed Elizabeth Afton and after Circus Baby's Pizza World closed, a different pizzeria that never fully opened.
I've been out before, but they always put me back. They always put us back inside. There's nowhere for us to hide here. There is nowhere to go when we look like this.
Because of this, they were forced to combine into one animatronic and scoop an employee of the bunker, Michael Afton. They used his body to escape, where instead of looking human, they actually became one, but we already know this. But finally, when looking at one more mystery Dolly can solve, let's look at Night 4. On Night 4, the player is placed into an empty spring lock suit and is tasked with rewinding the spring locks to prevent them from activating. After a certain amount of time, the night ends and the player is successful in escaping the spring lock suit, but one mystery still stands: who is the spring lock suit that the player is trapped inside of? Well, what if it was Dolly? She has the same 4 faceplates the Springlock suit has, and the structure of the eyes and mouth would also line up slightly. If she is also a Funtime and a much older version of them, then it also makes sense she would reside in the bunker as a malfunctioning Springlock suit. But at the same time, these animatronics and their faceplates don't match up perfectly. We don't know if William Afton got her back after Secret of the Mimic, and we don't even know if she's a Springlock suit. And most importantly, it's not confirmed that she is a Funtime or that William Afton created her, which brings me to my last point. This video is just a theory and by no means is anything confirmed. We are just attempting to use the new lore from new games to solve parts of the older lore that still hasn't been answered, like using Dolly to solve Social Location and the Funtime animatronics. If you disagree, that is completely fine, and make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. But finally, let's look at a theory that would directly connect the warehouse of Secret of the Mimic to the Pizzaplex from FNAF Security Breach. A theory that connects all pizzerias to one location. A theory that believes the warehouse has been right under our radar this entire time. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the FNAF Secret of the Mimic warehouse and of the Security Breach Pizzaplex. Now, I've made a few videos attempting to solve this theory that the warehouse or factory from FNAF Secret of the Mimic is directly under the Pizzaplex and under the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. With the very first video on this topic, by using evidence from the demo of Secret of the Mimic and the description of what what the warehouse looked like, I began by comparing the location under the sinkhole to the warehouse by comparing things as simple as the walls, stairs, and overall design, and also by pointing out all the similarities and differences that were available at the time. I also went over how odd it was to have animal mascot suits in the sinkhole, as it was unknown how they ended up there and why they look so old. Well, what if they weren't brought to the Pizzaplex? What if they've always been in this location and never left? That's why they're so old, and that's why they're in this room. The exact same logic would also apply to this cardboard cutout of Fredbear in the actual caves. The reason it's randomly here is because it never left the location. I also went over the design of this location and how it's almost built into the caves, showing how old it really is. With the second video, I went over how these red bricks that were found all around the Pizzaplex actually came from the warehouse. They were in different rooms, areas of the Pizzaplex, and most importantly, they were in the sinkhole. They were at the entrance with the Freddy head, they were in the caves, and they were also the foundation of the wall at the entrance and the exit to the caves, again proving they were from this location and proving these bricks were built into the caves. There were also these vintage TVs that were found with the bricks in the Pizzaplex, and these TVs come from the late 1970s. And when does FNAF Secret of the Mimic take place? That's right, the year 1979. And finally, with the most recent video, I went over how prize boxes found in the sinkhole were teasing this future game this entire time. Here we found prize boxes with the exact same pattern as the carpet from the teaser trailer and from the room in the Help Wanted 2 update. These prize boxes were found only in the sinkhole and in areas that I believe were a part of the warehouse. To me, all of these pieces of evidence were more than enough to prove that the warehouse is under the Pizzaplex, meaning the Mimic has been down there since 1979, and even Gregory supports this idea in the canon ending. But now with the official trailer finally being released, I believe it just further proves this idea, and I also believe it's going to be one of the big reveals of this game. Starting with the most obvious connections and similarities, it's being heavily believed that some of the rooms shown in the trailer are the exact same rooms and hallways we find in Ruin and Security Breach. Starting with the very beginning of the trailer, it looks like this room where we find all of the mascot suits and cardboard cutouts of different characters is the exact same room as the one we find right after exiting the caves. The layout of the room is identical, and there are also similar storage shelves on each side of the room, and in both rooms we find similar boxes and storage units. And in Ruin, this room would have been where we could have found the Secret of the Mimic prize boxes, as it would have been in the very corner of the room, which would again confirm that these two areas are the same. And just by looking at the rooms side to side, it's hard to deny that they were designed to be identical. In Ruin, the room is simply missing the mascot suits and cardboard cutouts of characters. Earlier in the video, I mentioned the Fredbear cutout being in the caves as supporting evidence, and in this room we find many more cardboard cutouts of characters and animals. We find a lion, a sheep, and even a jester, which did have a role with the Mimic in the novels. So what if Fredbear came from this room where everything else was stored, but would eventually end up in a different area, which would then become the caves in Ruin? But moving on to this room where the player is winding up this toy, it can be argued that it resembles the room where Candy Cadet resides in. The layouts are similar yet again, and this store would be in the exact same place as this store that leads to stairs. There are also the same storage shelves, and in Ruin we find the red bricks scattered around the room that would have come from the walls of the warehouse. But this doesn't mean that Candy Cadet originated from this factory, as we know he comes from FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, and it makes more sense that he was just moved to this area once construction started on the Pizzaplex. But finally, what I think is the most compelling piece of evidence, let's look at this hallway where the Jackie chase sequence takes place. Now I don't think we can find the exact room in Ruin, but instead I think the lighting and structure design are similar to these areas in Ruin where the stairs begin. When looking at the very end of the hallway, we see wooden planks and this very specific oval shaped orange light, and in Ruin we find wooden planks and a oval shaped orange light. These are the exact same designs, and specifically it's almost impossible to deny that the lights are supposed to be the same, and that they're even on the same area of the wall. When looking at these two side by side, there's no other simple way to put it, but they're both the same. I think it's clear that Studio Studios is trying to tell us that this was on purpose and that they're the same for a reason. These wooden planks were actually what I focused on in the very first video, so seeing identical ones in the trailer finally feels like a form of confirmation. But I quickly want to look at the very last shot before Music Man jump scares us, and here we find stairs with metal railings. And these metal railings are very similar to the ones surrounding the stairs in Ruin. Although the exact areas aren't the same, I do believe the railings are. But for supporting evidence from the very start of the trailer that connects to the Help Wanted 2 update, let's look at this blue van. It's assumed that the protagonist who we will play as arrives at the warehouse in this blue van with a new Fazbear's Entertainment logo. And we find the exact same blue van in Help Wanted 2. After finding all of the puzzle pieces, the picture will reveal the location where Secret of the Mimic mimic will take place, which we now know is a warehouse, and flipping it over would reveal a mysterious van. Finishing the puzzle would also cause the warehouse itself to appear right in front of you while wearing the Vanny mask, and with it off, the blue van will then appear, also revealing that Mexus is in the back. After entering a code that was found on the building, Mexus will appear for a brief moment before being sucked back into the machine while the van drives off. So what does this mean? Well, if we know the protagonist is behind the wheel and that they arrived in the warehouse in this blue van, that also means that Mexus ends up in this van either at the start or at the end of the game. To me, it makes the most sense that in this scene when he arrives, Mexus is already in the van. We know the player is attempting to retrieve the mimic to return him back to Fazbear's Entertainment, so what if the company sent the player with Mexus to make the retrieval much easier? A part of the gameplay could be setting up Mexus to disable the mimic for a certain amount of time, and the Help Wanted 2 update was showing us the player delivering him to the warehouse. But what does this mean in terms of the warehouse being under the Pizzaplex? Well, I want to follow the exact same logic I've used all video, now with Mexus. He wasn't brought here by Gregory and Vanessa like it was previously believed. He was brought here by an employee in 1979 and never left the warehouse. That's why Mexus looks so old and almost a part of this room. This machine has been here for decades and has been stuck here ever since it completed its purpose in keeping the mimic trapped. If he does actually originate from 1979, that could mean that William Afton or Henry Emily had a part in its creation, especially if Fazbear's Entertainment would send this machine with the employee to the warehouse. And throughout the game, I actually do believe we'll find out who created Mexus and why. But when looking back to the location in Ruin, we find this scooping room, which actually played a role in one of the endings where the mimic was scooped out of the lion mascot suit. If this area really is in the warehouse, this means the scooper is a part of the warehouse and also came from 1979. And this actually makes a lot of sense when looking at the context of the trailer. We see the mimic switching from mascot suit to suit. We see him in Jackie, the mushroom suit, the elephant suit from Ruin, and even in the Tiger Rock plushie costume from Help Wanted 2. So the scooper existed in the warehouse to remove endoskeletons from the mascot suits. Maybe the scooper will even play a role in removing the mimic from one of the mascot suits, just like it did in Ruin. So does this mean that Edwin Murray created the scooper here, or was it Fazbear's Entertainment? Well, this is something we still don't know, but I'm sure will also be revealed throughout the events of the game. But finally, what does this all mean for the layout of the Pizzaplex? Well, it's all connected. On the very top we have the Pizzaplex, underneath it we have the FNAF 6 Pizzeria, and underneath that is the warehouse from Secret of the Mimic. But that's not all. It's also believed that the FNAF 6 location was actually a revamped version of Fredbear's Family Diner, which could be why we find posters advertising this location in Security Breach. And the Fredbear cutout could have come from this location and not the warehouse, which is why it ended up in the caves. It's also believed that the FNAF warehouse and sister location bunker also somehow fit within the Pizzaplex. Now really the only evidence is the scooper room and Michael Afton's room, which is why I don't really think this is possible. But if it somehow is, this means the Pizzaplex would contain locations from FNAF 4, sister location, Pizzeria Simulator, and now Secret of the Mimic, which is a lot. But this would mean that Henry Emily was fully aware of the warehouse, as he chose this location above it to be the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. Maybe we'll even learn that he has a much closer connection to this warehouse and to Edwin Murray than we previously believed. Now let's prove once and for all why Michael Afton has to be alive in this new era of the franchise. This new era of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise includes memorable games and projects like FNAF Security Breach and the Help Wanted games. These games are known for the complex lore or story that include many mysteries for the horror community to solve. And one of the biggest mysteries that still hasn't been answered is the involvement of the Afton family. I've made plenty of videos attempting to prove that Michael Afton is still alive in the FNAF franchise and has had a role in every single game released after Pizzeria Simulator. But in this video, I believe I can actually prove once and for all that Michael Afton has actually been alive and has been right under our noses this entire time. So by going over old evidence that I've already discussed and new compelling evidence that I haven't seen many people talk about, let's definitively prove why Michael Afton has to be alive. Make sure to like and subscribe, sit back and enjoy my theory on the franchise's most crucial and fundamental character, Michael Afton. First, let's quickly go over Michael Afton's appearances throughout the entirety of the franchise, following the timeline that's most believed in by the community. We first see Michael in FNAF 4 as the main character who is facing hallucinations of the nightmare animatronics. We then see him in FNAF 2 as the security guard on night 7. Sometime later, we then see him again as the main security guard in the first FNAF game. Then we see him in the underground bunker in FNAF's sister location where he is searching for his sister, Elizabeth Afton. But at the end of that game, we see Michael be scooped by this machine, which results in Ennard using his body and controlling him, until Michael throws Ennard up. But instead of this killing him, he actually survives and becomes immortal, as we learn from his monologue.
She's free now, but something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows.
We then see him in FNAF 3 once more as a security guard as he looks for his father, and at the end of that game he burns down the pizzeria but manages to escape. We finally see him one last time in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, but this time as the manager of the pizzeria. He lures the final 4 possessed animatronics left and burns down the pizzeria one last time, but this time he burns with it, and with that Michael Afton's story ended. But what if it didn't? What if Michael Afton is still alive? What if he's had a role in every single FNAF game released after FNAF 6? Now I'm sure many of you are thinking that Michael chose to die in the FNAF 6 fire, as Henry says this in the ending.
And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be.
It's assumed that Michael chose to stay, but it's never been confirmed. And it could very easily be possible that Michael knew it would never be over, which is why he instead chose to escape in case his father were to ever return. Which brings me to the first FNAF game in the Still War era and the first game Michael Afton returns in, FNAF Help Wanted. Now starting with the evidence we see in this game and in future games is the idea that certain things just wouldn't exist without the existence and knowledge of Michael Afton. We see mini-games for the 3 core FNAF games, and we also see mini-games using certain animatronics like Nightmare Fredbear and Ennard. So what if this information of the Nightmare animatronics used for this VR game came straight from Michael? As I discussed earlier in the video, we actually play as Michael in FNAF 4. We know this because of the survival logbook and because of the latest tales from the Pizzaplex novels. We know this book belonged to him as he wrote his name in the beginning with red ink. And later in the book we see this drawing of Nightmare Fredbear with red ink, meaning it was drawn by Michael, and again it means he saw the Nightmare animatronics at one point. Now at the same time it could be disproven that Michael was the only one who saw the Nightmare animatronics. In the latest tales from the Pizzaplex novels, we learn that the Nightmare animatronics were just mannequins on rails, but a gas release would cause whoever was in that room to hallucinate the Nightmare animatronics. We also learned that many people were subject to this gas in experiments, meaning many people have seen the Nightmare hallucinations, and this information could have somehow made it to this VR game. But I don't think Ennard can be disproven. Michael was the only one who has seen or even knew about Ennard, as Ennard used his body to escape the underground bunker. So because Ennard is in this game, it could prove Michael was the one who gave the information to be used in the VR game, and it once more proves he's alive. But this is something I'll talk more in depth about when I cover Security Breach. But moving on to FNAF AR, one of these scrapped email addresses actually directly confirmed that he was alive and was in contact with Fazbear's Entertainment. When looking at the email, it reads, ID alert to M. Afton at bigbearmails.net. Now obviously the email M. Afton stands for Michael Afton, and it's hard to argue that it could belong to any other character from the series. I have seen some fans argue that it stands for Miss Afton, but I don't think this would be the case, as usually the first and last name are used, and we don't even have confirmation that Miss Afton exists. So although we don't actually have any exact emails that were sent between Michael and others from the company, there's still an important detail with the address. Next to the address, we learn that the receiver was sent an ID alert. These alerts are sent to notify users of security events or any updates. And really this alert could have been sent for anything, but most commonly it's because suspicious activity was detected on the email, like someone trying to sign in. So what if someone was trying to sign into Michael's email? And this could have even been someone like Vanessa, as we know she was hacking emails during the events of FNAF AR. Now when looking at FNAF Security Breach, this room was found within the Pizzaplex, and it's a 1-for-1 replica of Michael's room from FNAF's sister location. But why would the Pizzaplex make a room from the Afton family's house if no one would ever see it or even know about it? Well, the consensus is that it was for Michael. The TV even works, and there's real popcorn on the ground, which to me would imply he's there frequently or that he even lives there. In his room there's also a cryptic message. When decoded it reads a long message, but I want to focus on only the beginning. It reads, break and mend, I built the breath. Mend is defined as rebuilding and to restore. Building the breath is referring to giving something life. So to me, this is Michael telling us that he created the Pizzaplex as a whole, and more specifically created the animatronics. He gave them life. And in Rockstar Row, which is a museum that holds old and new artifacts, we see things like animatronic parts, posters, drawings, and cardboard cutouts of different characters. But 2 displays might prove Michael is still alive. This display has 2 artifacts from FNAF 4. These are 2 toys from the Crying Child's room. Except that this isn't the Crying Child's room, it's actually Michael's. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, we play as Michael in FNAF 4, meaning these are his toys. Who else in this new era of the franchise would want to display something from the Afton family house if the artifacts didn't directly belong to them? I think this is Michael Afton displaying these toys as a form of nostalgia for him and as something to remember. And in the very corner of Rockstar Row, we find cardboard cutouts of different animatronics. We see Dreadbear, Ennard, Shadow Bonnie, Nightmare Balloon Boy, Plush Trap, and this circus baby plush. And it's these animatronics that I believe may prove Michael Afton is still alive. So the animatronics I want to focus on are Shadow Bonnie, Ennard, and Nightmare Balloon Boy. Throughout the franchise, Michael has been the only character that has seen either of these animatronics. In FNAF 2, he would have seen Shadow Bonnie in the security office. In FNAF 4, he would have seen Nightmare Balloon Boy as one of the hallucinations. And as I've discussed many times in the video, in FNAF's Cecil location, Ennard used Michael's body to escape the underground bunker. But it could be argued that other people like Jeremy Fitzgerald or other people in the FNAF 2 pizzeria could have seen Shadow Bonnie, and any of them could have included them here in the Pizzaplex. And like I've also mentioned, the information of Nightmare Balloon Boy could have also come from someone else who was subject to the experiments. But Michael was the only one who knew of Ennard, as it would have been impossible for anyone to know about him before he was separated from Michael and turned into two separate animatronics. I have seen some debate that Ennard could have been seen by one of the security cameras that existed in the bunker, and that is a fair point. But why Ennard? They could have chosen any other Funtime or any other animatronic to be a cardboard cutout, but Ennard was chosen. An animatronic who literally was Michael at one point, an animatronic that is so closely related to him. This just doesn't seem like a coincidence, and with all of the other evidence, I believe it has to mean something. And now when looking at one of the security offices, I believe we actually get our first look at what Michael Afton looks like and at his design with the Steel Wolf FNAF games. Next to the computers, we find this framed photo of two people with writing under it. Taking a closer look, both people are wearing a Glamrock Freddy themed mask, and the writing reads Fred Masquerade. And the date under it looks like it reads 2025. 2025 could actually be the year Security Breach takes place, or it could be something else and not a year. And when looking at the two people, they are both wearing purple jackets and a mask covering their faces, but we can still see their necks and their skin tones. The person on the left is wearing a flannel, and it actually looks very similar to the one Vanessa is wearing in the sad ending from Ruin. And when comparing their skin tones, they also look very similar. So could the person on the left really be Vanessa? However, I mostly want to focus on who's to the right. When looking at their neck, it has a very different skin tone compared to the person on the left. It almost appears to even be purple, similar shade of purple as the jacket. And who else has purple skin? Well, that's simply Michael Afton. No one else in the franchise literally has purple skin like Michael. And not only that, but the Freddy mask is also a hint to this character. Vanessa does have a Glamrock Freddy mask, as it resembles the shape and design of this character's head. But when looking at Michael's, the mask has sharper cheeks, a longer snout, and smaller eyes. If anything, it looks like it's actually a Foxy mask, just redesigned to have a Glamrock Freddy design. And Michael himself wore a Foxy mask in FNAF 4, and Foxy has always been a way to represent this character. The Foxy mask and skin tone are explicitly telling us that this is Michael Afton and that he is still alive. We all just missed it. I've actually used this photo a few times in this video because I am that confident it's him. So this would mean he's been in contact with Vanessa, and it even looks like they're friends, and I'll explore their friendship later in the video. And for a smaller hint, the writing Masquerade is defined as an event where people wear masks and hide their identities or appearances. And this is exactly what Michael has done throughout his entire journey. He used the alias Mike Schmidt in the first game, Fritz Smith in the second game, and he continues to use the last name Smith even in Security Breach, but I'll get back to this sticky note soon. So this Masquerade event could be a hint to Michael and his actions. Moving on to the arcade machines, these games reveal the highest scores of the top players, and the names of these players reveal the identity of characters we already knew about, like GGY being short for Gregory. And on this machine, the second highest player's name is SMI, which can be short for either Schmidt or Smith. Two last names used as an alias by Michael in the first two FNAF games, which would imply once more he was in the Pizzaplex frequently enough to where he was playing arcade machines. And when looking at the specific game he's playing, it's called Fredbear's Nom Nom Bites, a clear reference to Fredbear biting the crying child, which was Michael's fault. It's almost ironic and perfect that he's playing an arcade machine about Fredbear's bite. And now when looking at the FNAF 6 pizzeria in the sinkhole, we also find a small detail that could be related to Michael. In the room where Gregory fights Burntrap, and in the hole of this wall, we find a Foxy plushie next to an endoskeleton head. Because we already know Foxy and this character can represent Michael, what if this plushie was also an Easter egg to this character? And that's why it's in the FNAF 6 pizzeria, as that's where he would have supposedly died. The endoskeleton head next to it could be an Easter egg to the bite of 83, as the crying child was bitten on the head. So this endo head being next to the Foxy plush could be a reference to Michael being the cause of the crying child being bitten on his head and almost losing it. But now when looking at the final but most compelling evidence from Security Breach, let's look at this simple sticky note, meeting with Smith at 5 p.m. Smith could be anyone, so to connect it to Michael, let's go all the way back to Five Nights at Freddy's 2. On night 1 through 6, we play as a security guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald, but then suddenly on night 7, we play as someone named Fritz Smith. Fritz Smith is believed to be an alias for Michael Afton, as I've already discussed, when he secretly worked there. A name similar to Mike Schmidt, which was his alias when he worked in the pizzeria in the first FNAF game. So if Fritz Smith really is Michael Afton, then this meaning could be referring to Michael as well. Again, this would make sense, as if he did work in the Pizzaplex and had a major role in it, then of course he would be in meetings, of course he would need to meet with different people, of course he would still be alive. But now, moving on to FNAF Ruin, let's start with the piece of evidence that was found at the very beginning of the DLC. At the entrance of the Ruin Pizzaplex, we find different pieces of graffiti scattered around the building, like these about Vanny. And on the wall before you find the Roxy walkie-talkie, you find this graffiti of Foxy's hook with the name next to it. I've already gone over how Foxy represents Michael's presence, so this hook alone is already an interesting piece of evidence. But the faded purple name next to it would read Mike. The M and I are more visible while the K and E are almost completely gone. And it looks like Michael himself created this Foxy Hook graffiti art and spray painted his nickname next to it. This was most likely when Gregory and Vanessa also ventured to the Pizzaplex, as we see graffiti that supposedly came from both of them. So we can also assume that Michael was with them and left a piece of graffiti art of his own before leaving. But why would he venture back to the Pizzaplex? Well, right before the Mimic is released, Cassie disables the mech's security system, and later on she finds out that it was actually the only thing keeping the Mimic trapped. And for the most part, the consensus among the community was that the security system was created by Gregory and Vanessa to contain the Mimic, but recently we learned that this isn't actually the case. In an interview with FNAF and the creator of Steelwood Studios, we learned that the machine was designed to look old, hinting that the machine itself is also old. Now, who created Mexes can be a video on its own, but I want to focus on who is the one maintaining the machine. Someone had to set up the security nodes that powered Mexes, and someone also had to have taken Gregory down to the abandoned pizzeria. As in the same room where we find the Mexes machine, we also find Gregory's backpack. And right after the Mimic is released, Gregory also mentions how his friend has access to the building maps. He also tells Cassie to follow someone's instructions, but the name is cut out by static.
Friend has access to the building maps. Just follow the instructions.
Many fans, including myself, first thought that this person was Vanessa, as that's who we saw Gregory escape with in the canon ending in Security Breach. But what if this wasn't Vanessa? What if it was actually Michael Afton, who appears once more in the franchise in Ruin? Although I don't believe Michael was the one who created the Mexes machine, I still think he was responsible for setting up the security nodes and maintaining the machine, as he must have been alive when it was created. Vanessa might know about the machine, but I don't think she would know how it worked or how to operate it, as she wasn't alive when it was created, and I think the same could be said about Gregory's mysterious friend. Sure, Vanessa would know about the layout of the abandoned pizzeria and its surrounding caves, as it's assumed she brought Freddy down there to clear the path. But I think it makes even more sense that Michael had the layout to the pizzeria, as that's where he supposedly died, and if he really did create the Pizzaplex, then of course he would know all about the caves and the way they worked. If Vanessa really was the friend Gregory was talking about, then why cut off her name as if it were some sort of secret? We've known of Vanny's and Vanessa's existence ever since FNAF Up Wanted, so it would almost feel random to hide her name. But Michael, on the other hand, has never been confirmed to be alive, so if they were trying to hide a name, it makes a lot more sense that they were trying to hide Michael. And lastly, in the secret ending, we saw the Mimic be scooped just like we saw Michael be scooped in FNAF's Sister Location. This is a direct parallel that feels very intentional. If Michael and Sister Location were so heavily influenced into the Pizzaplex, it makes sense to have him included into the DLC in some way or another, even if he had a very minor role. But before I move on to our final game, I want to look back to Security Breach and an actual message from Michael. Something else that I didn't mention that relates to Michael is the duffel bag right in front of the door. The message named Torn Paper reads, "It is there, but you can't see. Alone in the dark, I found the key." To me, this message almost exactly mirrors the events of the Ruin ending when Cassie finds the Mimic. It was the Mimic and Cassie couldn't see it at first. The Mimic was also alone in the dark, which would make him the key. Because the duffel bag was right in front of the door, we can assume that it belonged to Michael and that these are even his own words. Even the cryptic nature of it resembles his monologue from Sister Location. So it looks like Michael was describing what Cassie would eventually face, and what if it's also what he faced at one point? What if Michael also found the Mimic, alone in the dark, and describing it as the key? A key that would explain the glitch trap virus, a key that explains deaths in the Pizzaplex, a key that might even connect to his past in 1983 and its secret of the Mimic, a key that would be the reason he would need to even return, the reason he is still alive, to take down the Mimic once and for all. Now I know that does sound far-stretched, but I actually think it's a very likely motive for Michael Afton to actually come back. But finally, let's look at all the evidence in Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2 and why all this evidence connects the Ruin while also proving that Michael Afton is still alive. But first, I think it's important to note when this game takes place in the timeline, as it's not what many people would expect. With the release of the newer FNAF games, the order in which they take place in the timeline is the same order as the games are released. FNAF Help Wanted started this new era, with FNAF AR being released shortly after, then Security Breach and Ruin would follow, continuing the story. And again, most recently, Help Wanted 2 was released, meaning it should be the next game in the timeline, but we know this isn't correct. We instead know that Help Wanted 2 takes place after Security Breach and before Ruin, and we have plenty of evidence that proves this. For example, in the Roxy Salon repair minigame, the player must fix Roxy's ruined face from the end of Security Breach, where they ultimately fail. They instead end up using this mask, which we also see in Ruin. This would explain why Roxy has a different design from the end of Security Breach, as it was actually the player from Help Wanted 2 altering her design. Moving on, in the bad ending, you are awarded with a present after beating enough minigames. When opening the present, you unlock the last collectible figure in the collection, but before you can even unlock it, a charging station appears in front of you. The charging station then opens before Glitchtrap's hand peers out, grabbing the door. Then out of nowhere, 5 nightmare staff bots appear in front of you and jump scare you. You are then presented with a small cutscene in the perspective of a staff bot. In this scene, you see Cassie and you give her the Vanny mask. It's the exact same moment from Ruin when Cassie first finds the Vanny mask from the perspective of a staff bot. This bad ending is directly telling us that the events of Help Wanted 2 take place before the opening sequence of Ruin. So now that we know this game must take place before Ruin, now let's quickly answer who we play as, since this will directly tie into how Michael is still alive. Being that we play as Cassie's father in Help Wanted 2. In Ruin, we learn that Cassie's father used to own a Faz ranch, insinuating that he worked for Fazbear as a technician. And in Help Wanted 2, we see the main player unlock a Faz wrench that is used to unlock this door, again hinting that we play as Cassie's dad. But most importantly, we learn that his favorite animatronic was Bonnie, which has led many people, including myself, to believe that Cassie's father is also this boy from the FNAF 4 ending. And the secret ending directly confirms this. In the secret ending, you are transported into the actual Princess Quest game itself after unlocking a coin to play it. Then, after beating some levels, you find 6 gravestones with different plushies next to them. You can light these gravestones, and if doing so in a specific order, a secret staircase opens. There you will find that this chest is available to be opened, and when opening it, inside is a Bonnie mask with the message, "This looks familiar." This Bonnie mask is the exact same one he wore on that fateful night when him and Michael accidentally killed the crying child. And again, the secret ending and mask confirm that Cassie's dad is the same boy from the FNAF 4 ending. So I also want to point out how we find this exact same mask as one of the AR collectibles that Cassie collects in Ruin. And what mask can Cassie also collect that's also an AR collectible? That's right, this Foxy mask. The same Foxy mask that Michael also wore on that fateful night, and it's this Foxy mask that proves Michael Lafton is still alive in Help Wanted 2. And these two masks are the only masks that can be collected. An important detail to note, you can't collect a Freddy or Chica mask, and this is done for a reason. But how can Cassie even collect these masks? Well, this is where a theory comes in that I haven't seen the community talk about enough, being that the Vanny network is actually a hive mind, meaning whatever is seen and used by one person wearing the Vanny mask, any other person can also see those things and collect those things that are also in the Vanny network. For example, because Cassie's father was also in the Vanny network, when he found the Bonnie mask, other people in the network like Cassie were also able to find it, as again, everything would be shared among the Vanny users. But how did the Foxy mask that belonged to Michael end up on this network? Well, I think the answer is simple. The reason the mask even exists is because Michael Lafton is also inside the Vanny network, and he was also in the Princess Quest minigame at one point. When looking at what the Bonnie mask and chest mean, it all has to do with accepting the past, giving memories life, and moving on. I think by Cassie's father lighting these gravestones in the order the children were murdered, he's giving these memories life and accepting the past. And by giving these memories life, he can start to look at his own past. That's why he can even find this Bonnie mask. It's a memory from his past, a very traumatic one, and one that he needs to move on from. And really, I think whoever makes it this far in the Princess Quest arcade machine and makes it all the way to this chest is able to discover something from a traumatic memory. And it's possible that some of these collectibles in Ruin were memories that different users in the Vanny network found in the Princess Quest game. And if we apply the same logic to the Foxy mask, that means that Michael Lafton is in the Vanny network and again was inside the Princess Quest arcade game, meaning he also made it all the way to this chest where he would find the Foxy mask. It makes the most sense that Michael's traumatic memory that unlocks something is his Foxy mask. He accidentally killed his younger brother by throwing him into the mouth of Fredbear, and it would make sense that this memory is something he would need to move on from and get past. But in order to even get to this point, Michael must have had to travel down to the abandoned FNAF 6 pizzeria using a Vanny mask of his own. And because he used to be a manager at this pizzeria, we can only imagine it made it that easier for him. But this brings up an even even more important question, why wasn't Michael able to go all the way and trade the Vanny mask for the Glitch Trap plush, which Vanny then destroyed, setting herself free? Why wasn't Michael able to get this Glitch Trap plush? Well, I think that Michael Lafton simply wasn't able to move on. In the secret ending, we see Cassie's father being able to trade the Vanny mask, but I think this was only possible after he accepted his past and was able to move on from it. But if someone like Michael wasn't able to move on, then he would never be able to trade the Vanny mask. And it makes sense that he wouldn't be able to move on. This was the traumatic moment that started everything for him, and because he is still alive and trying to defeat Glitchtrap, who is possibly his father, then of course he isn't moving on. He's living in the exact same cycle he lived in years ago, where his entire purpose was to defeat his own father. But either way, we know Michael was in the abandoned Pizzaplex since Cassie unlocks this AR Foxy mask, which was Michael's memory the chest displayed for him. And I think after all of this, Michael Lafton would return to the surface where he would meet with Gregory and Vanessa, and this would lead directly into FNAF Ruin. So with that, this is everything we know about Michael Lafton being alive in Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2. So when looking at all the evidence proving Michael Lafton was alive, what was his role in the overarching story in this new era of the franchise? Well, we can first assume that he was an employee, and at that a high-ranking employee for Fazbear's Entertainment. He worked on the development of the VR game and on the construction of the Pizzaplex, as he implemented a replica of his own room and included toys and cardboard cutouts of his memories. After the events of the Princess Quest ending and after the Pizzaplex collapsed on itself, Michael would presumably team up with Gregory and Vanessa to defeat the remaining Glitch Trap virus and to keep the Mimic trapped in the sinkhole. He would even have a Vanny mask of his own and was in the network at some point. And during the events of Ruin, Michael was responsible for helping Gregory and giving Cassie directions on how to escape the caves and the Mimic. But up to this point, this is everything we know about Michael Lafton and his role. I think it's likely that Michael will have a major role in a project or game after FNAF Secret of the Mimic, which could be anything like Security Breach 2, where he could team up with Gregory and Vanessa once more to attempt to rescue Cassie and to try to stop the Mimic for good. But I also want to emphasize this video is just a theory. Nothing is confirmed, and Michael Lafton being alive is still just speculation and theorizing. But after looking at everything in this video, I do think we can confidently prove and solve that Michael Lafton is and has always been alive in this dual era of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. But what do you guys think? Is he still alive? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. Moving on, let's look at cut content from another Stu Wolf FNAF game that can also be used to solve the lore. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach has been released for over 2 years now, but many mysteries still lie within the Pizzaplex. And one of the biggest mysteries around not only this game, but the new era of the franchise is the original planned story and what it would have looked like. These new games are known for having an extensive history of unused and cut content that never made it to the final product, and FNAF Security Breach is no exception. This game is known for its cut content revolving around characters, villains, and even endings that would have changed this game's impact on the lore. So in this video, I'm going to go over the most important cut content from FNAF Security Breach that might actually be the key to solving some of the biggest mysteries from the lore. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's uncover the mysteries of the cut content from Security Breach. Now, when looking at all of the cut content from FNAF Security Breach, there's a lot to go over that includes unused minigames, characters, locations, collectibles, subtitles, assets, and mechanics. So in order to make things a lot easier and so we can actually attempt to solve the original lore, I'm only going to go over what I think was the most important and crucial cut content that can actually solve the mysteries of Security Breach. But I think it's important to understand how different Security Breach was originally supposed to be, and this is made clear with the original trailers and teasers released for this game, which I'll go over later in the video. Even Scott Cawthon himself has stated how his version of Security Breach was going to be much different. But by looking at some of the cut content, we might be able to put together the missing and original pieces of the story, starting with Burn Trap. I've already made a few videos on Burn Trap and what his original purpose was. Specifically, Scott Cawthon stated that he was never supposed to move, and that he was going to act like a decaying movie prop. But then in the final game, Burn Trap is moving and is trying to stop Glamrock Freddy and Gregory, and the cut content only expands on this idea and version of this character. In the files, Burn Trap was going to have a much bigger role with his boss fight. He has an unused data chase sequence as if he were meant to have a second fight stage after the monitor office fight. And we have this clip that gives us an insight to what the chase animation would have looked like. Now, it's not really clear where this chase sequence was going to take place, or if Glamrock Freddy was also going to be a part of it as he was in the sinkhole with Gregory. I think it makes the most sense that the sequence would involve Gregory trying to escape the sinkhole and trying to reach the Pizzaplex once more. But Burn Trap would be on his tail, and maybe the Blob would also be an obstacle, as the Blob was something else attacking Gregory in the first segment of this boss fight. But Burn Trap was even going to have a death animation that would have supposedly played at the end of the chase sequence. It's not exactly clear what is happening or what caused his death, but I think either one or two things are happening. Either he is being consumed and burned by a fire like we saw in the new ending, or his body is completely shutting down. We can assume that Burntrap was being kept alive by this charging station, as that's where he was being held, and this purple gas might be what gave him life. So when he's out of this charging station and is chasing Gregory, then it makes sense that his body and Endo would shut down, which would cause his death as we see in this animation. But with the game's final release, all of the mentioned data assets end up unused, as setting Burntrap on fire for the last time during the office fight will skip to the ending cutscene. Now I also want to look at the first teaser trailer that gave us voice lines of Burntrap and a new scene that wasn't used in the final version of the game.
When I first found you, you were nothing. You were small, pathetic. But now, you are more. Are you ready? You will do as I say. You will bring me what I want. And if you fail me, then you will, both of you, burn!
Realize.
In the first voice line, we can assume it's Burntrap or Glitchtrap speaking to Vanessa before she would become Vanny, and he's preparing her for what's to come. In the second voice line, we can assume this is actually Burntrap because of the slightly different voice, and again, I think he's still talking to Vanessa. But when he refers to both of you, I think he's referring to Vanessa and Vanny as two separate entities. Or he could simply be talking to Gregory and Vanny, but either way, I don't think any of these voice lines really revealed to us what his purpose was. And in the last scene, Scott Cawthon made it clear that Burntrap was not supposed to move at all, and in this clip we clearly see him moving. And although we never saw this clip in the final game, I still think this was created after Burntrap's purpose was changed. This could just be an alternate scene to when he was revealed, and that's why we even see the purple smoke behind the arm, and again, all of this was most likely planned after the change. But now that we've gone over all the cut content for Burntrap, how does this help to solve Security Breach? Well, all of this just shows us who the priorities were going to be in this game. Burntrap was obviously going to be the main villain and was going to have a bigger role throughout the entire game and not just the ending. It looks like he was going to actually control Vanessa and was going to be in contact with either Gregory or Freddy, meaning he would have been the main focus of this game and maybe even in future projects like Ruin, or it could have been made clear if Burntrap is really supposed to be the Mimic. If the ending was also supposed to be completely different, there's a possibility that the Burntrap ending could have been canon instead of the Princess Quest ending, where Gregory and Glamrock Freddy could have escaped somehow and we would have followed these events in Ruin. I also just think that there would have been more explanation to how this character was alive and to why he was even created. And it also looks like we would have gotten a further explanation to the Glitchtrap virus, which has played a large role in this new era of the franchise. Not only will these explanations finally connect Burntrap to Vanny, but it would also smoothly connect Security Breach to FNAF AR and Ruin. So a simple extended boss fight could have solved a small but mysterious part of the lore. So moving on, now let's look at the Mimic's lair from Ruin and how it would have been a better explanation to the Mimic and who he truly is. The original version of the room in which the Mimic is being held in is drastically different to the version we saw in the final game. It features the original 3 main animatronics performing on stage, which would have presumably been placeholders, and a table with a piece of cake on top of it. This layer is clearly reminiscent of the Pizza Party minigame from FNAF Help Wanted, which is a free roam level set across a maze of the main Five Nights at Freddy's pizzeria locations, where the player must find the pizza party without taking too long and being jump scared. Once the minigame is completed, the player will find themselves in a room filled with animatronics, balloons, and presents. Glitchtrap then appears from the curtain and tells the player to follow him. If the player moves in his direction, the player will suddenly be put on a stage holding a microphone, which means that the player is now Freddy Fazbear. Hand Unit announces the arrival of Freddy but ends up glitching out. The room then lights up, revealing Glitchtrap dancing around the room while music plays in the background. Now this ending is supposed to be Glitchtrap reenacting the missing children incident, with the main player being the main victim. Glitchtrap is copying William Afton and his actions by stuffing someone into an animatronic, and we can even say he's mimicking them. So much that it's theorized that Glitchtrap is actually the virtual version of the Mimic who is mimicking William Afton. As in the Tales from the Pizzaplex novels, we learn that the original Mimic chip used to create the Endo was used when creating a VR game, which would supposedly create Glitchtrap. But in the community, it's been heavily debated that Glitchtrap is actually the virtual reincarnation of William Afton and isn't related to the Mimic at all, as he would then come back into the physical world as Burntrap. But like I mentioned, the Pizza Party minigame where Glitchtrap is the main focus in is the setting and location right outside of the Mimic's lair, and this is no coincidence. I think this is directly confirming that Glitchtrap is and has always been the Mimic. Why else have a one-for-one replica of this room where the Mimic is found if it's as not to tell us something. Now, how it would have played out or the context of this room even existing isn't really clear. How would Cassie react to it? Would the setting itself have a role in the chase sequence? Would glitch trap or a reference to him be present? Well, we can't really answer these questions yet or why it was even removed. It could be possible that it was cut because it would tell us who the mimic was too simply, and that it would be too on the nose. But the point still stands. Not only does this tell us who the mimic is, but it also solves one of the biggest debates with this character. This simple layer tells us that the mimic is and has always been glitch trap. But moving on, let's look at unused levels and what they tell us about the original story and mechanics. Starting with the boiler room and with the events of the side quest, originally a frozen variant of the Glamrock Endo was located in the game files. Although some body parts were found in-game, the complete model goes unused except for parts of it found inside of a box in the first security office. There is also an unused side quest related to this Endo that I believe might have connected to FNAF's sister location and its animatronics. When looking at the dialogue between Glamrock Freddy and Gregory, it looks like Gregory was going to venture down to a cut boiler room where he would have found the Faz camera, instead of finding it in Monty Golf like we saw in the final version.
That Endo's frozen solid. It's holding some sort of camera?
But most importantly, from these voice lines we learned Freddy warned Gregory not to go down to the boiler for some reason.
Perhaps if you adjusted the heat in the boiler room you could melt it. The boiler room is down in the utilidors. I will mark it on your map. However, I do not recommend you go there.
Now this could simply be because the boiler room would obviously be dangerous, but what if this line instead connects to the events of FNAF Help Wanted? In Help Wanted, there is a boiler room where the player has to complete objectives while also watching out for Ennard, who is one of the main antagonists in this game mode. And this mode ends with the player burning the boiler room and Ennard, so what if we also find this exact game mode in Security Breach and in this cut level? We've already seen an exact replica of the Build a Mango room from Help Wanted, so what if we also found a replica or a room similar to the boiler room from Help Wanted? Now I don't think we would actually find Ennard himself, as that game mode did take place in Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, and Ennard would have been long gone by now. But similar to Michael Afton's room that we find in the Pizzaplex where it's a 1-for-1 recreation, I do think we could have found a small reference to Ennard, like his bow tie or mask. Something that didn't come from the original animatronic, but something that still referenced this character and that time period, just like Michael's room. So although I do believe this room would have a small connection to sister location, this level was ultimately cut for unknown reasons. And moving on, I want to focus on an entirely different game mode that was cut from Security Breach and Ruin. Originally, there was going to be a survival mode, where you would try to survive as long as possible while running away from the animatronics and completing different objectives, like finding prize boxes. But in Security Breach, it's been assumed that this game mode wouldn't have lore importance, but in Ruin, I believe that this game mode was going to be very important and that it could have solved a small part of this game. When looking at this new game mode that was updated for Ruin, we see that one of the objectives would have been to rescue spirits. Now this is a huge reveal for this game mode, as spirits in the FNAF franchise obviously play a huge role in possession of the animatronics, and the spirits alone are a big mystery within the community. So I think they would have played a large role in this game, but how? Up to this point, most of the spirits have been put to rest, so what spirits remain that would need to be rescued? Well, it makes sense that they're the spirits of the missing children that we learn about in Security Breach. Throughout this game and in one of the endings, we learn that multiple children are missing in the Pizzaplex, and we know this was the doing of Vanessa under the orders of Glitch Trap. If these children were murdered by Vanessa, these spirits would be somewhere in the Pizzaplex and might even possess certain animatronics. So I believe it was these spirits that would need to be rescued and freed by Cassie in this survival game mode. But how she would rescue them and if they did have lore importance isn't clear. But again, because spirits have always had such a large role throughout the entirety of the FNAF franchise, I still believe they would have been crucial to this game mode. Maybe they would even reveal to us if the Glamrock animatronics or other animatronics in the Pizzaplex were possessed by spirits, or if other characters like the Blob or Burn Trap were also possessed. But moving on, I now want to look at a cut design for one of the franchise's most mysterious characters, and a character I've already made a video on, Mexis. Mexis is an AI designed to keep the mimic contained and serves as the secondary antagonist to Ruin. The program takes on the form of a shadowy rabbit with disembodied arms and a ghostly tail, and electricity connects the joints to their arms. Previously, I theorized that Mexis was actually created in 1979 by an employee of a factory, who would then have their mind transferred into this machine and would don the design of Mexis, which is a blue rabbit. You can watch the full video here to have a better understanding of the full context, but now I believe this cut design proves this idea even further. Here Mexis would have looked a lot more like a human, as they would have had arms, legs, fingers, a rib cage, and even teeth. He also appears to have something in the center of his chest that is glowing. Now it's not clear what this is supposed to represent or mean, but maybe it could have something to do with Mexis being a human and having their mind transferred into the security system. And it's not clear why this design choice was cut from Ruin. It could have been because it's a lot more terrifying compared to the original design, because it's even more different than other designs in the franchise, or maybe because it would have made it too obvious that Mexis is actually supposed to be a person. But finally, to end off this video, I'm going to look back to Burntrap and the possibility of William Afton himself being planned since the very beginning. Like I mentioned, it's been heavily debated if William Afton was planned to return since the beginning, and if the Mimic was only planned after the release of Security Breach. I've already gone over voice lines of Burntrap, but I also want to go over unused laughters and sounds from Burntrap that might also prove William Afton himself was going to have a major role. When listening to both the voice lines and laughter, we clearly see how they evolve from sounding human to more like a monster and an animatronic. And this evolution is also what we see with the William in past games throughout the franchise, where he starts as a human but then he becomes an animatronic and monster known as Springtrap.
She can dance. She can sing. She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips. She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream. I always come back. Bittersweet, but fitting. What a deceptive calling. I knew it was a lie the moment I heard it, obviously.
So does this mean that originally William Afton himself or a version of him was going to physically be in Security Breach and would have played a major role? Well, I think it does, and specifically it looks like William Afton would have started as a human, and throughout the events of Security Breach he would have transformed into a version of the animatronic we all know of, Burntrap, who we already had so much cut content revolving around this character. Now obviously William Afton wouldn't be alive by this point, so instead I think it's a version of him who had his mind transferred into an endo which would become Burntrap. So in his human form, he would simply be an endo with human flesh on it, and again he would transform into Burntrap, and his voice or laugh would transform with him. So based on these voice lines and laughter, it does look like William was planned to return since the beginning and would continue to be the main antagonist like he was in many past FNAF games. So also based on this information, were William and the Mimic planned to be the antagonists of the franchise, or was it only supposed to be William and the Mimic was added later? This is something we can't still answer, but after these voice lines it's hard to deny that William himself was planned to come back once more. But for a quick disclaimer, I want to go over the idea of even using cut content to solve the FNAF lore. It's been argued that cut content shouldn't be used when theorizing because they were cut for a reason. It could have been because they didn't fit with the story anymore, because they changed their mind on certain characters or endings. And although I believe this as well, I also believe that it's okay to use cut content only as supporting evidence to things that we already. For example, we already know Burntrap is related to William Afton and the Mimic is related to Glitchtrap, but the cut content only helps to prove these ideas and aren't used as the core evidence when theorizing. So if you disagree with using cut content for evidence, that is completely fine, so make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. And with all of that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the cut content from FNAF Security Breach and how it potentially solves the lore. So what do you guys think? Does this content help to solve the lore? So let me know if I should make a second part to this video, as there's a lot more unused content that I didn't discuss in this video that can be used to solve the FNAF lore. Looking back at Secret of the Mimic, now let's look at new screenshots revealed from the Steam page and what they tell us about the lore. Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic will be the latest installment to the franchise, and the official trailer was just released, revealing new gameplay, mechanics, and characters. And even more recently, the Steam page for Secret of the Mimic was released, revealing 6 new screenshots from this game that give us better looks at new characters and design choices. Although these screenshots seem simple and straightforward at first, many fans, including myself, believe they might actually give us many new lore reveals that help us answer questions questions from the overarching timeline. And one screenshot might even tell us how Edwin Murray is connected to William Afton and to Fazbear's Entertainment. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go over the lore reveals and the screenshots for FNAF Secret of the Mimic. We got a total of 6 different screenshots from this game, and as we continue to look at each one, we find more and new lore that helps us answer questions from even the earliest games in the franchise. So starting with the first and most straightforward screenshot, we first find Jackie looking out of a vent and staring directly at the player. Now it was revealed that this moment was actually a part of the demo at PAX West and a part of the chase sequence, where Jackie chases the player by coming out of multiple vents and by looking at the player through walls and fences. So this looks to be the start of the chase sequence, and it's also one of our best looks at Jackie so far, which is actually the Mimic. We see the same orange eyes other mascot suits have had, like the orange and blue mushroom character the Mimic also wears. We know Jackie has normal green eyes, but we can assume they'll be destroyed or lost, which causes the Mimic's real orange eyes to be revealed. But there isn't much to talk about here, so let's look at this photo about the older and original Music Man. We finally get a better look at this animatronic and how they're going to be connected to music and to older instruments, since this game is going to take place in the year 1979. His arms and legs are made of a brass-like material, he's wearing a top hat, his ears appear to be gramophones, and his mouth is an old-style music box chime that could play notes and music. Comparing them to Music Man from Security Breach, they share a similar design while at the same time being very different and unique to the time period they were created in. So it's interesting to think how this animatronic will act. To me, it makes sense that there will be a threat the player will need to watch out for. We know the player will be able to access the roof, which is also where it appears Music Man is jump scaring us from. They could see the player as a security threat, or they could be possessed by the Mimic virus, which would be another reason they're attacking us. But most importantly, does this mean that Edwin Murray created Music Man since he's in his factory? Well, this is something I'll dive deeper into with another screenshot. But it looks like Edwin created the foundation of the styles and designs of many characters throughout the franchise, characters that might have been stolen from him. Moving on to screenshots of monitors and terminals, we don't see anything new besides a small detail I haven't seen anyone else mention. But we first see the MCM logo we saw in the Help Wanted 2 update and throughout the trailer, which we now know stands for Murray's Costume Manor. There's other details like the PA system or the safety notice, but what I really want to focus on is the clock, which reads 12 AM. I believe this is at the very start of the game, and like Security Breach, Secret of the Mimic will start at 12 AM, and as the game progresses, an hour will also advance, until the very end of the game where it ends at 6 AM, like the many other classic FNAF games, which also means that the game will take place throughout the course of one single day. But moving on, let's look at 2 photos focusing on the mascot elephant suit. The first photo reveals the construction of the elephant suit. We see the foam and stitching of the mask, body, and arm, and we also see the suit being put together as the clothing is already on the body. Because we already know another suit exists, we now know multiple versions of one character exists, which does make sense, as if one was destroyed or malfunctions, they can quickly be replaced. And with the next photo, we see the exact same elephant mascot suit from the one we see in Ruin. It's also the one we saw in the trailer, just in a different part of the warehouse. The suit is obviously newer here and includes parts that are missing from the one in Ruin, like the tusks. We can assume this is gonna be another suit the Mimic will wear while hunting down the player, and it could even be the one right after he gets out of Jackie, as it still looks to be early on in the game. To the right of the elephant, we see a mascot suit that's hard to make clear what it is. Some have said it's a dog, a cat, or even a hedgehog, so what do you guys think? Comment down below what you think this mascot is. We see a bee plushie in the back, the same one that's the focus in this poster revealed at PAX West, although it's not clear if the bee is also going to be a mascot suit. But there really isn't much to see here either, so finally let's look at the last screenshot that might give us major plot points of the overarching timeline and story. Here we can find 2 mascot animatronics and 2 smaller animatronics all performing a show, a welcome show that would be at the front of the warehouse. At the PAX West demo, there was also this welcome poster showing us the exact same welcome show we see here, where the mascot hippo is performing with 2 small frog animatronics. We are finally seeing this poster come to life. We also see a mascot alligator animatronic next to the hippo playing the banjo. And next to the alligator, we see 2 sheep cardboard cutouts next to what looks like a moving circus. Now I'm sure many of you recognize some of these characters as the mediocre melodies. The hippo is of course Mr. Hippo, and the 2 frogs could represent Happy Frog. Meaning this group of animatronics has existed for much longer than we could have ever expected, and the same would apply to the alligator, who is clearly supposed to be Monty. Monty was introduced in Security Breach and in one of the newest locations, the Pizzaplex, where he was supposed to possibly the very first alligator-themed character. But now we're learning this wasn't true at all, and that a version of this character existed since 1979. But these characters came from Edwin Murray and from his warehouse, so how did Fazbear's Entertainment get a hold of them and made them their own? Well, a theory and one FNAF has even covered in his newest theory, what if William and Fazbear stole ideas and inventions from Edwin? That's why characters like the hippo and frogs would become animatronics and a part of the mediocre melodies. And others like the alligator and music animatronic would later become modern additions to the Pizzaplex and Security Breach, as Montgomery Gator and as Music Man. Which is why they're not mascot suits, why they're completely separated from MCM, and why they're now under Fazbear's Entertainment. At first I believed that William, Henry, and Edwin worked together, especially after looking at the mural found on the warehouse building from Help Wanted 2, where we could find 3 diamonds next to the animatronics, which would represent 3 CEOs. But instead, because Edwin Murray was missing and left his warehouse abandoned, it looked like Fazbear's Entertainment completely stole design choices for certain animatronics and used them for their own benefits. But before mascots like the alligator and hippo were made into animatronics, I think they started out as simple pieces of merchandise a part of Fazbear's, like masks and plushies. In front of the warehouse, it is even advertising masks and gifts here, so they could have even stolen the ones themselves from the building or recreated new ones that better fit their theme. But what proves this is FNAF 3 and the Happiest Day minigame. This minigame featured a birthday party with children wearing different animal masks representing different animatronics. It focuses on one of the Golden Freddy spirits and the many other spirits inhabiting the animatronics finally being freed and put to rest. But at the time this minigame and FNAF 3 were released, fans were quick to point out the animal masks that didn't match up with any of the other classic animatronic designs we had at the time. It wasn't until years later in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator when the mediocre melodies were revealed that it all started to make sense. The pig mask represented Pig Patch, the orange elephant represented Orville Elephant, and the purple mask represented Mr. Hippo. But what looked like to be a green alligator mask was still unaccounted for, but many fans were quick to dismiss it as Happy Frog. But now we know in the timeline that it was most likely based on the alligator mascot suit and not Happy Frog. The mask always resembled an alligator with its long snout, and maybe this is what Scott Cawthon intended originally but changed it to be Happy Frog later in the series. But now it can represent an alligator, a stolen character who would eventually become Monty. This theory comes from just the screenshots we were given and from the information we gathered from the trailer. So there could be even more characters and animatronics that could have been possibly stolen by Fazbear's Entertainment, like the mini Music Men. These wind-up toy animatronics also come from Security Breach, and because they are just smaller versions of Music Man, what if Edwin also designed them and had them in his factory? I also believe we'll see mascot suits for the Corpman animatronics, which would mean they started as mascots designed by Edwin and were later designed into animatronics owned by Fazbear's Entertainment. But we know these animatronics were always owned by Fazbear's and not Edwin. But with all that said, this is everything we know about the 6 screenshots from FNAF's Secret of the Mimic. Part of this video was just a theory and nothing is confirmed, so if you disagree that is completely fine, and make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. And finally, to end off this video, let's go over how FNAF Help Wanted 2 solved the Rockstar animatronics for us. The Five Nights at Freddy's franchise now has a total of 12 different FNAF games that include hundreds of unique and memorable animatronics. And some of the most memorable animatronics come from the earliest point in the timeline, like Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. But with new inclusions to the franchise, like with FNAF Secret of the Mimic and the FNAF Help Wanted 2 update, we've now had to rethink the earliest point of the timeline and more specifically the animatronics that were present. We've already been introduced to new animatronics that came from this time period, but in this video I'm going to go over animatronics that we've already been introduced to years ago that might have also been from the earliest point in the timeline, and might have been the most overlooked characters in the entire franchise. So make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go over how FNAF Help Wanted 2 solved the Rockstar animatronics. The Rockstar animatronics are a set of revamped animatronic models from the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place location by Fazbear's Entertainment. They first appeared in FNAF 6 as purchasable items from the Smiles and Servos Inc. catalog, which is a company that I'll get back to later in this video. However, Lefty is the only animatronic that can be found in the refined sections of the catalog. They would then later make appearances in FNAF Ultimate Custom Night and Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted 2 with minor roles. Now at the surface, these animatronics seem like background characters that were only here to be bought in FNAF 6 and didn't really have lore importance. But now with new lore from the newest projects like Help Wanted 2, I now think the Rockstar animatronics were crucial to the earliest point of the timeline, and they might have even been created before the original animatronics. So let's first go over their appearances. The Rockstar animatronics seem to be based off the classic animatronics in their withered forms. They all have heads separated from the jaws, sporting round blue and red cheeks, and metal stars on their chests and equipment. If these animatronics seem familiar, that's because there's what looks like to be another Rockstar animatronic that was revealed in Help Wanted 2, Carney. Carney had a small role in this game as both the announcer and antagonist in the Fazer Blast levels. Carney is a russet brown colored bear that is clearly similar to Rockstar Freddy and Lefty. Carney has bright yellow eyes with maroon eyelids, he sports a blue top hat and a green and white striped vest. He also wears a blue bow tie and his kneecaps are also the same color. His head is also separated from the jaw by metal rods just like the other Rockstars. It's been heavily theorized that not only the Fazer Blast levels but also the carousel levels with Moon actually take place in a carnival within the FNAF universe, Fall Fest. We've already seen the Fall Fest carnival in the Help Wanted Dreadbear DLC where we saw Fall Fest 1983, and the minigames in that DLC also took place within the carnival. But now with Help Wanted 2, we find a poster advertising Fall Fest 1970, meaning this carnival has been around for much longer than we've expected and much earlier than any of the pizzerias. So if we are assuming that the minigames in this game are taking place in Fall Fest, that means that Fazer Blast and this carousel minigame are presumably taking place in the 1970s, which would also mean that Carney is from this time period as well. So when looking back to the Rockstar animatronics, how can Carney also be a part of this group based on their designs if the rest of the group comes from the latest point in the timeline? Well, what if they didn't? What if the Rockstars were also from the 1970s and from Fall Fest, making them the earliest animatronics in the timeline? Because we find different animatronics attending each attraction in these minigames, it's safe to say that at each event or attraction in the Fall Fest Carnival, there was a corresponding animatronic you would find at the scene. Carney was at Fazer Blast while Moon was at the carousel, and these are just the attractions we know of. And although we don't know of the other attractions at Fall Fest, I believe that the corresponding animatronics at those attractions were actually the Rockstar animatronics. Let me explain. Carney having an identical design to the other Rockstars feels very intentional. Not only is it to show us that they're the same, but it's also to show us that the Rockstar animatronics were also possibly a part of this carnival. Now I don't think they were the exact Rockstar animatronics that we find in FNAF 6, but instead I believe it was carnival style the Rockstar characters instead. And specifically, it makes sense that Rockstar Freddy was originally Carney. They share the exact same design and Carney would have just been the first version of this character. And I believe the other Rockstars would have had their own booth in the carnival, excluding Lefty who was created in FNAF 6. And it makes sense they would have all had unique names while sporting a striped green and white vest just like Carney, or they could have all had their own unique designs. But we can even predict the attractions these animatronics would have been a part of, as we can assume Bonnie would have been a part of a booth that had something to do with music. Chica would be a part of a classic carnival attraction that includes food, or she could have even been the attendant at a food stand. And it's safe to say that Foxy would control a pirate-themed booth, and we can even say that the bird on his shoulder that appears in FNAF 6 and Ultimate Custom Night also had some role in this attraction. So I believe that these animatronics would have been known as the Carnival Rockstar animatronics, which means that the Rockstars were originally attendants in the Fall Fest 1970 carnival. But what would this mean for the rest of the timeline and for the other animatronics that would supposedly come after this time period? Well, in one of my last videos, I went over the FNAF Help Wanted 2 update and the new building that was revealed where Secret of the Mimic is now going to take place. I also went over a mural on this building that actually revealed to us the first animatronics to exist in the franchise. The mural depicts a blue bunny, a yellow bear, and has symbols of a sun and moon. The moon and sun clearly represent Sun and Moon, who were introduced in Security Breach, meaning they actually came from the early 1970s and were part of the first animatronics created. This would also line up with the moon being the antagonist in the carousel minigame. But because the symbols are small and subtle, this could mean that they only served as side animatronics to the main two characters. As front and center, we find a yellow bear and a blue bunny, not a yellow one. It's never been debated that Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were the first animatronics ever, and that they were the face of the company. But now with this mural, it looks like Fredbear and Bonnie were actually front and center. But in that video, I went over how I believe that they were actually mascot versions of these characters. Mascots that we've already seen in Ruin and in the Secret of the Mimic demo. You can watch the full video here for a full explanation, but now, how do the Rockstar animatronics fit in with this lineup? Well, like Sun and Moon, I think it makes the most sense that they were simply side animatronics that only had a role in Fall Fest. This would also mean that in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator, the Rockstars would not be revamped versions of the original 4-man animatronics, but they would now be revamped versions of their original carnival counterparts. Animatronics that would simply be attending their booths, animatronics that would eventually be forgotten alongside this carnival. Now this is a topic I'm going to fully go over in another video, the Fall Fest fire. In every single minigame connected to Fall Fest it ends in a fire, and we even have this version of Carney or Rockstar Freddy where he is fully burned. Meaning at some point a fire took over Fall Fest and was the reason it was forgotten for so many years. Now who started this fire, what year it took place, and how it affected Fazbear's Entertainment are all topics I'm going to discuss in a future video. But for now, I believe that this fire destroyed the Rockstar animatronics and the memories of these animatronics, until they were brought back years later by a mysterious company, Smile and Servos Inc. This is the company we find in FNAF 6 in the catalog, as they were the ones selling those animatronics. So does this mean that they are responsible for bringing them back, for remaking these animatronics and selling them to this new pizzeria? Does this also mean that they were around in the 1970s and were the ones who created the original Carnival Rockstar animatronics and sold them to Fazbear's Entertainment? Well, these are mysteries that can't really be answered right now. Would everything come full circle perfectly and make sense narratively if these mysteries were true? Well, of course. But there's no way of really knowing, especially since this company isn't mentioned anywhere else in the franchise. But I do believe that there is a small chance that they will show up in FNAF's Secret of the Mimic, where we know Fall Fest will have a large part in, and I also strongly believe that the Rockstar animatronics themselves will also show up in Secret of the Mimic. Now I don't think they will have large roles where they're antagonists or anything we will have to watch out for, but I do think we'll find references to this group, or we might find the animatronics themselves scattered around the factory where the game will take place. In the demo, we learn the factory is already full of empty mascot suits, so is it really that hard to believe that they would also be full of animatronics, like the Rockstars? So because Carney shares a strong resemblance to the Rockstar animatronics, and because we know nothing about the Rockstars and a carnival named Fall Fest, we can begin to theorize that the Rockstars were originally in the Fall Fest carnival as attendants in different booths, just like Carney. They would all be carnival themed characters, but they would be forgotten in a fire that destroyed Fall Fest, but they would be brought back by a mysterious company in FNAF 6. So I believe that the Rockstars were originally known as the Carnival Rockstar animatronics and had a role in Fall Fest. Now I want to emphasize this video is just a theory and nothing is confirmed. I think this is just a fun theory where the Rockstars are now much more important to the franchise and will have roles in part of the timeline we've never seen before. So if you disagree, that is completely fine. Make sure to comment down below your thoughts and theories. And what do you guys think? What are the Rockstar animatronics and did they have a role in Fall Fest? And with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed 2 hours of Steel FNAF game theories to sleep to. So what do you guys think? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories. Also make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you guys so much for watching.